Alright. The advantage of climate change is real and anthropogenic domestic court action on pending atmospheric truck challenges represent the best chance for survival. 1 in 16 humans are increasing emissions and destroying natural things. It's so possible for living in something that requires reducing the carbon. The 50 ppm, the low state on 1 degree, the land started increasing the level of natural vegetation by the rest of the too steep to have penalty by 20, or if that's everybody the roof carbon like atmospheric levels dropping us, and then I'll turn off the fossil, also I'll unclog the drain and drop out the reforestation, food and control 100 degrees temperature, making a vapor sex for phosphate pyramid pairs, then result only half of carbon limited to very bad pairs, that domestic process must fight the imperative that ATL the structure and emission reduction to push the power to the political takes which instead of actually the hashes institutes. But often Cincinnati, the cost of the uniform trust to protect the action losses, but in the force plans to reduce emission back by annual carbon county compliance. They are valid breaking for the legal level force energy for legislature to respect the legislative fleet community for the political rights to protect atmosphere property codes and advocating environmentalization will also for other rights to form the trust function for the executive legislative branch to save them from parks first of course about the speaker solution. ATL can handle multiple spending, the adoption for the expedition and natural resource abundant legislation and creating future generations collective well-being in the face of a disparate climate change requires a commitment to ecological stability and action causes slow violent barrage on Weeble 13 dependence of human beings and the environmental and natural systems social movements are the heart of the struggle, the weapon head and framing policy with regard to if we move in the drug atmosphere, flooding oil, valley, sort of base, has coming over world by problem with toxic contamination, devastating Africa, rainforest contributions rapidly, the life of us, stability, the way those are reminded of the let's force system, the way we the world would be eating the first life factor, life surprising, most spiritual substance, major emissions cuts now are key universal tipping points, make future adaptation impossible, wrong in 16 climate change, which are unparalleled in human history, and anti-climate change will be universal, many scales, the large number of removals, apex will be much worse than every starting with moment, starting facts with carbon access right now, when you're reversal, apex are see the rise of decimal 2015 the first time, the worst things factors, the reverse, the apex, the apex, unique about the MCC, CC is non-mitigation, the cost of the cost of break, the content, differently or not, as you're right, universal, and actually the impact adaptation, the election of Trump means that all warming policies that are risk of being reversed. This guarantees climate catastrophe, establishing restrictions to application of the public trust doctrine to preserve the environment instead of broader precedent to contain Trump's executive lawlessness, pressure, 3-step, and corporate, says for a moment, trial the United States after the moon, not only historical child of the culpability of the U.S., but of course, protect rights to the government and endanger health, improving and promoting also in the field of developed governance, violence, especially by the destruction of the essential reaches for violence and civil climate, nation, study, history, medical, ability, political, motive, the false campaign, no, Trump's climate, the rule of the federal whole so they say judicial branch, body state checking the executive, right to climate also hard about the useful, be bound by the executive, imposed government, some court systems, but the effect of climate is a critical part of social substance, right? Use climate system people, single life, the embrace of long first immigration, LGBT people, the people of color, workers' rights, the women, children, the disabled, the public trust, reorients governance toward insurgency, creates the basis for enforceable global climate action necessary for a zero carbon transition, pressure and 16 public trust, provided power, powerful basis for insurgency, as trustee, the same as the fiduciary, the actual, solely the organization, the official action for the purpose of banking a corporation in trust, as which the African, and for as long as the Native American culture, PTDs, national and manufactured ATL, brush suicide, office, the FG, and the federal applications to protect the federal PTD, the declaration of public property rights, PTD, the list power government, the culture, find the triple and federal competition, pedophilia, block fracking on nation, and co-10 countries, one, trustee, bring action to reducing 350 or less in the straight cancer of content and all, United States, and set the business cover the destruction of 100 cancer, the low constitution, responsibility time with the employee, the country, very widely contribution in ways, of course, proportion fair shares to, which also raising 5 special courses, need to weigh, share of third emissions, historical share per capita emissions by purpose, with cultures of the sovereign, the religious, taking account on equal distribution, share after the consequences that's going to illustrate the congestion made enforceable carbon budget, the cocaine issue, just injection property by purpose of new coal plants, trustees have the duty to recoup taking parties to destroy assets, all forms of at the ground for recovery damage, companies to pay with good pay for the change to a low carbon economy, governments are comfortable and first the game with promoting the electricity, the power PT, run up against the entire world order, the action and body damage that short the right to develop global economies, global defending laws, and making laws their own hands, taking the public trusts to be all their sons are free, other future generations, future obligation, is enforceable by these system beneficiaries, enforceable to have it, and the beneficiary right to enforce another obligation, legal paradigms like the public trust don't abandon radical environmental politics, they incite them, translating duties into responsibilities, creates cultural tipping points that defy incrementalism, more than 14 new political processes, requires legal paradigms, by central principles and guide, legal local makers without something besides decision makers continue to allow corporations which whether they have the transcend duties, responsibilities, but efforts within the British, something of paralysis, social advance rapidly, most recent, taking away women, a more conventional, the workers, women, booming, taking off the sausage, grass walls, and punch history, the road to mobilization, the interfering with the world, seem impeccable to the right person, in the right place, it can be tipped. Climate change is a wicked problem in which hard, unthoughtful commitments fall flat. The necessary response requires provisional and partial, ethical, and political decision making, able to adapt as new cultural and scientific developments occur. Russell 10 climate change is a wicked problem. The beneficial cultural messages are so complex that there are not only be partial ones needed, approach and make open to revision, improvement, and also new information that values will be essential. The inclusion of all the rights until they cannot be achieved practice to unavoidable partiality, originality, mental system. So to continue to current commitments, fast start certain values, disputing systems, or elbow and 20 across ontological commitments are able to deal with the dynamic complexity, the beneficial cultural and ethical practice foreclosed the Florida version system making stimulated legal debates are crucial for social transformation. Teaching legal precision is key, even if one-shot legal solutions don't work the first time. Claire 11, as students are asked to simulate the rule and make the best arguments they can. Ineffective theory is not wasting time learning the encouragement lawyers is useful. Knowledge on now, those by theorists are actively constraining sense of the complexity of the norms and principles are implemented rules of lawyers taking terms such as how to define who is anyone, remedies to provide either to litigation, they focal point on community to mobilize the extent of laws constrained by bridging capitalism is a dangerous fault to limit their aspects of what social justice law can achieve once legal education uses a personal very pervasive exaggerate essentially constraints legal rules, the critical legal process, disruptive process, and boosting the legal process with emancipatory and egalitarian content or alternative social justice. These system orders on immutable that people have the power to act on. Viewing political systems as close to environmental change as fatalism, institutional failures create the fissures for political resistance. This is not to say every institutional avenue succeeds, but that court action in the face of the environment is particularly useful. Roland in 16, not all hope is lost. When political opportunities appear close, when lawmakers are hostile to man with such environmentally people access to approach the court, but in front of social structures when individuals most likely time for the rules will mostly form one existing institution felt in the moments public form take up the post that the organization response comes into the environmental preparing the hope of the potential change for relevant ways both the bounds of restrictions that not have court institution not versus environment ground culture environmental values or restriction or not going to change themselves rejects false binaries being strategies of resistance. Court action is not the endpoint of a revolutionary vision nor a universal good, but the alternative to contingent and opportunistic use is a limit to the effectiveness of social change. Najami in 13 social legal scholars they put all their hope in the course to look to single hands to reduce change to the advocacy view. Litigation is a significant proportion not to one age, but then disrupts the face all the other mobilization groups in craft the vision force active philosophy attention to some often material in litigation more more complex other emphasis of course on social change the operating out of the legal theory false binary the course are influenced by as well as influence social mobilization the such the corporate make positive contribution to the world's dynamic condition and context specific models are broad structure and invoking the state is a key heuristic only to understand how to institutionalize collective decision making and address the distributional effects of climate change. Tweeting 15 scholars see the state is serving the market groups for the significance of state for environmental policy so better than regulation of foundation of environmental management the most powerful mechanisms of collective action they can control obedience and research to adopt the state as a category research can explore the organization networks and flows and responsible public good but a dimension of all distributional competent institutions are the applicable struggle norms and consider unified ideas trying to only partial coherence distributed state is anti-accidentally anti-environmental can be empirically observed potential and complementaries among these areas. The plan the United States federal judiciary should rule for the plaintiffs and Juliana v. the United States declaring an adversary of public trust doctrine that establishes the obligation of the federal government to limit carbon dioxide levels. Solvency. Ruling for the plaintiffs established both a substantive due process and a public trust basis for emission reduction board in 16 only and federal regulation for any hope of Trump and Juliana using the rest of the substantive due process of the NDT consistent with the public trust and substantive due process of the Christ will put in the Constitution and survey they cannot list the way the case will be since or at least the next number of the first time the use possible science court upholding the legal reasoning of Juliana solves crazy conditions to implement a public trust doctrine 8 and 16 pension price of action to enforce the obligation or substantive due process to defend this action of groundly damage or they threaten put on wise system in organizations and institute with the federal public trust and the to be maybe ground, but in courts have been cautious. The court said it reveals the failure of the system to reduction and the third should take a long look and careful look at the barriers of litigation created by modern doctrines. You can't circumvent the public trust doctrine solved in 16 with the support of scientific alliance and that answer to mention his testimony that would dismiss allegations against the personal victory the goals of approved the difference between damage and administration and can't tell line in court of content has now to have the court of law finance just go to check and trust plan the public container policy this changes the course. I think I'm good. I want to read first. So, yeah.
Alright. Who is surviving now?
What do you mean by surviving?
Well, you said survival, so
we think that if the climate change gets worse, lots of people will die.
Who is surviving now?
Who is surviving now? Many people are biologically alive right now. The question of what survival means sort of universally is not something the 1EC has taken a stance on.
What does it mean to restore equilibrium?
It means that most of the modern climate system has evolved within a certain sort of temperature range, about 1 degree below, 1 degree above 1750 levels. We think that is necessary for the stability of the ecological system. We do think some element of stability is important for survival of the people and animals and plants and things that live in the
Let's jump the gun. Does contingent violence operate within ontology?
Does contingent violence operate within ontology?
Can I answer this question?
Sure.
We have only made one claim.
That's cool. You'll make a claim in the 2AC, so let's just start to the discussion right now. Does contingent violence operate within ontology?
You're cutting me off about what I was about to say.
Are you going to answer the question?
We have made a claim about, well, I want to answer your question about ontology in the context of the 1EC first, which is that we've made a claim about warming, and warming not operating on an ontological level. Our Russell evidence says that, and that means that we can agree.
So is it contingent?
Warming is contingent.
So why does contingency not operate within ontology?
Because the Russell evidence says that warming is something known as a wicked problem, which means that its complexity in terms of both its material, cultural, and scientific
Why does ontology not account for that?
Because we don't possibly know, and we haven't seen, especially given both the rapidly
Is that not a
developing nature
vector of
warming
ontology?
impacts.
Is that not a vector of ontology?
No, it's
The
not a vector of
incommunicable?
ontology.
What?
It's
That's
not
fine.
in the
That's
context
fine.
of warming. It's not a vector.
The 1AC employs a PTD that turns off the faucet that's fueling the atmosphere. How?
That car uses turn off the faucet for a term.
In the context of feeling the atmosphere, i.e. the way that warming is becoming exacerbated. So my question is, how is the 1AC employing PTD stop that?
Because the PTD puts legal limits on emissions and stops or dramatically reduces emissions.
And it also creates a mandate to do things like sequester.
Yeah, so you have to turn off the faucet and unclog the drain. You have to both sequester carbon and stop emissions.
Cool. Why does the failure of Paris demonstrate we need better courts?
Our evidence says that the political branches of the executive and Congress have taken very weak action post-Paris, and they have not fulfilled their obligation to reduce emissions. The courts are necessary to force the political branches to act.
It's like, why is the U.S. correcting itself a reason to trust that Congress wouldn't abdicate its responsibility again?
Trust is not the relevant, I guess, dimension. It's that there's a
You
particular
put faith in them, you definitely
No,
put
you
them.
don't.
Yes,
to
you
act,
do.
To act within legal avenues.
Do you
does
change
not
the
necessarily
role of the
mean-
court?
Yeah, we make it a lot more powerful.
Is the 1AC a court decision?
Voting advocates court
Giuliani be the
decision.
United
And how do you change its will?
What does that mean?
How do you change the court's will?
We
The
certainly
plan
change
rules.
its burden of proof, causation standards.
Why won't they
the
just
political
abdicate that shit again?
questions that are allowed.
Well, first of all, we get fiat, so like the plan. Like if you vote out the
But
plan.
also, they can't abdicate if there's precedent necessarily.
Let's see.
Did you say you're sending it out?
Yeah.
Okay.
Do you want to stand?
Okay, it should be set.
Yeah.
It would just be one. They're going to do it. Yeah. 9:55. Everyone good?
Blackness is a constant disorientation that is experienced whether confined to the immediate presence of the state or not, which inevitably produces an antagonistic relational paradigm against the world's ethics. Our refusal to affirmative research breaks down presuppose instantiations of blackness, which are continual rupture of dysregulated existence. Therefore, in an attempt to refrain ourselves from reestablishing coherent subjecthood or persons, we wallow in our criminality by inverting the pathogenic violence. This is Wilderson and 14 ordinary white citizenizations of Native Americans. One little example of how this conundrum and paradox affect the way we can speak to white people and our so-called allies. The problem is in the liberal economy, which is saying to collect our conscience everybody else, we actually understand that better. We understand blackness is always already criminalized and collect our conscience. Our problem is one of complete captivity, birth, the definite origin, the starting point, our interaction with the state and other ordinary white citizens. We can start to see policing, mutilation, and aggressivity towards blackness. We can inform psychic health, well-being for the rest of the world, and we can reformulate the problem, begin to take a much more contemplative response to this ideal for the quality of life. Every other group lives in the context of violence, which is what we call a sort of psychological grounding wiring, which we say write a sentence about why they experience that violence. Native Americans have experienced violence because of an ongoing tactic, strategy of colonization. White feminists can say this same as ongoing strategy within tactic within the strategy of patriarchy. This ongoing tactic, a strategy for human renewal. Violence against us becomes a tactic within the strategy to secure humanity's place. It's not a tactic, ongoing strategy to take our land away or to take our rights away. We never had any rights. Our psyche does not obey the objective laws of the structure. We exist in external super violence and internal super which has self-hatred is one of its main components of structure by which human beings are recognized by other human beings incorporated into a community of human beings. Is anti-slave and slavery is something that's consumed blackness to Africans, making it impossible to divide slavery from blackness. The affirmative vivid description of inclusion only proves that we live in a political and academia world in which radical discourse only ever amounts to nothing more than a passionate dream. Civic performance, civility never resulting in analysis. The antagonistic structure, anti-blackness, instead is fixated the myriad of experiences, identities that make up those structural positions. Woodson says a seemingly benign process attempts to hide rather than making known the grammar suffering now covers the U.S. structural antagonism, mystifies and covers the ontological death of the slave is intellectual and political discourse and academia continues to resist unreconcilable demands of blackness. This is Wilderson and Tim. Black slavery is foundational to modern humanism's ontic freedom. The hub of humanism's conceptual trajectories are finite that they are predicated on an ideal freedom from some contingency that could be named the contingent right. It could be freedom from patriarchy, freedom from economic exploitation, freedom from political tyranny, heteronormativity, political discourse recognizes freedom as a structuring ontologic thin, works to disavow this by imagining freedom not through political ontology but through political experience and practice, whereupon immediately loses ontological foundations, allowing the notion of freedom to attain ethical purity and purity of its ontological status. One will have to lose one's human coordinates and become black. One will have to die for black freedom is an ontological question. The writers that one can place on black freedom would be hyperbolic, unattainable freedom, world freedom from humanity, freedom from everyone. The true freedom has never been a trajectory, which is why they have no line of flight leading to the slave. In their politics, deliberation is one that mystifies the systemic nature of racialization. Is Mark Knott and Section 3. Leftist approaches that come as close to a radical critique as any already fall short. The liberal ethos looks at racism, something characteristic of the individual that can be solved at a social level through education. Democratic procedural radical critiques assumes the issue of racism promises future transformations, power relations, which deracialization is deferred, which needs to be enriched when the grass of white supremacy is left entirely out of the account and name it epiphenomenal or the overdetermining as if there were something to center white supremacy to adamenting off, which most of Western analytics lost slides totally towards the simplicity of the personal or the institutional supposed secrets of white supremacy against spectacular displays and pathology and instrumentality. The less anti-racism becomes his passion, but his passion gives away, signifies a passive acceptance of the idea that race is not essential to the social structure and system. Social media's categorizations is the same passive apparatus of whiteness that is mainstream guys that forget that it owes its existence to the killing, terrorizing those who racialized for that purpose, expelling them from the human fold. In the same gesture of forgetting is the passivity of bad faith that tacitly accepts goes without saying the postulates of white supremacy in a very process of debate reinstantiates the pathology of consumption that bypasses our ability to antagonize the structure of violence itself. This is Wilderson. And 14, the web institutional relations, which we call college debate, represents itself as a bastion of the institutional world far removed from the daily injunction against black past. And present-day guardians of college debate will have us believe the world of debate and the world in general can be reformed, transformed, and thoughtful, well-meaning, liberal-minded people engaged in reasonable, rational, and above all, civil dialogue. A black person, even a free black person, might be in a worse situation than where in 1854 simply for the fact that no black voice has any truth, value. Black enunciations cannot be recognized and incorporated into the global fabric of human enunciation and narrative. Art of the slave, no pretense investment in emancipatory promise and democracy, no pretense investment in liberal notions of universal integrity of the human of the capacity to look into their hearts and change its kind, change the transformative promise belongs to white men and your partners, non-black immigrants, white and non-black people who are non-black women. These citizens live through narrative arc transformations. When need be, their collective unconscious can call upon blacks as props. They can harness anti-black violence to turn black flesh into necessary implements to bring about social transformation. A slave say looks a lot different from the political economy of debate, but the structural violence fortified and extended political and libidinal economy of the plantation can be apprehended in the libidinal economy of debate and debate as on the plantation fully vested citizens, not so fully vested citizens live through narrative arcs of transformation. A paradigm exists that one is a slave, one has no contemporaries, no interlocutors in the world. The scientists are coupled with a series of unsuccessful attempts on the part of slaves to find an auditor for his or her speech and be successful in the act of writing. The simple act of communication of being heard by the other turns into an endeavor that cannot be reconciled with statuses of speaking and implement the barriers that he makes income with the two things to secure his words on the page. Every declaration he claims his status as a free black and bona fide member of civil society is met with reason for joining his counterclaims that proves him wrong, but are met instead with the most horrendous acts of violence aimed not at producing a disciplined subject, rather is a violence aimed at maintaining annihilation of the subjectivity, violence in service to maintaining line between the linking and dead necrophilia and necrophobia, both of which is subtended by gratuitous violence, constituent elements of social death, alienation and general dishonor. And the answer is to refuse the freedom of the one see because to vote as the affidavits can be participatory in the fungibility of black status. The affirmative assumes it can be liberatory through a notion of public trust doctrine, but it only creates another tool for whites to use blacks and lead them into place. This is Wilderson and Tim. Reparations suggests a conceptually coherent loss and loss land, labor, power. In other words, there has to be some form of articulation between a party that's lost and a party that's gained for reparations. reparations to make sense know. Such articulation exists between the black and the world. This is precisely why I support the reparations movement, but my emphasis, my energies, my points of attention on the world movement. I support the movement because I know it's a movement toward the end of the world, movement toward a catastrophe and epistemological coherence and institutional integrity. I support the movement aspect of it because I know that repair is impossible in any struggle that can act as a stick-up artist to the world, demanding all that it cannot give, which is everything, is a movement towards something so blindly new that it cannot be imagined. This is the only thing that will save us in public. Trust doctrine is the foundation. The police state, they just play with the contours of that police state. This is Torres and 15 public trust is one of those pre-existing principles upon which the legitimacy of the state was constructed. Legislative power itself is bounded not just by the general understanding of the police power, but that the police power itself is informed the contours of the obligation of the public trust doctrine. The state is the apparatus that mediates and operationalizes that basic agreement in court. Activism fails, it's too complex to regulate and will be rolled back and circumvented by conservative courts. This is precisely the way in which anti-blackness structures our own political system. This is Lazarus. And 15, the court's inability to fashion appropriate remedies on their own to address climate change also throws a lot of water on the venture. Imagine what would be required for climate change in the light of its extraordinary temporal and spatial scope of cause and effect and the corresponding complexity of the technological, economic, and social judgments that must be made in determining how to address the climate issue. The courts do not remotely possess necessary competence on lawmaking legitimacy to answer those kind of questions. They will decline to do so. Ruling will likely be limited upon further view, and their tipping point arguments are inevitably trigger the effects of warming caused feedback loops that prevent them from changing anything. This Adler and 15, the effects of even moderate warming on sea level rise are worse than previously believed. Modeling found oceanic ice melting may exceed our expectation. Influx of freshwater from melting ice sheets would shut down ocean circulation, causing cool water to stay in the Earth's polar region and equatorial water to warm up even faster. It's melting. Ice shows this really dangerous situation where you get melting that causes more melting temperature increase of 1 degree Celsius that resulted in higher sea levels that we must then we are projected to accompany that temperature rise in the field. In the future, glaciers will melt 10 times faster than previous consensus estimates. We've already warmed at about 0.8 degrees Celsius. Even if we turn off the spigot, we got a couple of decades of warming ahead of us. Some scientists argue that 2 degrees Celsius is the point already an unrealistic goal because of the global community simply isn't reducing emissions enough to get there. The point at which warming becomes exponential instead of linear is more like 1.5 degrees Celsius. If we pass the tipping point, no climate agreement can do shit about it. Multiple all causes and scientific analysis proves this is Ritchie and 17,400 parts per million for carbon dioxide was cited as the tipping point for climate change. Now that we passed that value, it has become common to say that it wasn't really a tipping point. We have decisively passed it. CO2 levels appear certain to continue higher. Ralph Killing, the originator of the famous Killing curve, said it already seems safe to conclude that we won't be seeing monthly value below 400 parts per million this year or ever again. Tipping point abrupt irreversible change would inevitably lead to a large change in the change of the system, i.e. independently of what might happen to control. Thereafter, past the tipping point, there will be drastic changes, even if stop emitting CO2 rather than saying well below 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels as the target. There could be warming several decades with associated sea level rise and rainfall change. CO2 has not only been increasing, it's been accelerating.
Looks research analysis of Clinton Trump policies projected a difference billion metric tons in 2025.
Good.
Mm-hmm.
The first piece of Wilderson evidence describes how different groups experience violence as the context of a particular strategy against them. It says black people experience violence as just like the condition of humanity's strategy or actions against them. How does Wilderson know to make that distinction?
Well, I think Wilderson is sort of hedging back against this quantitative data that would speak to a grammar of violence, and instead positing on a qualitative level, is there a repetition of violence that is met at the level of flesh, not just in relation to white v black, but like you said, black v the world. And
so that doesn't really answer my question though. How does Wilderson know?
I was kind of getting to the answer.
Okay.
So what I mean by qualitative data, or sort of qualitative understanding, is there a constant repetition or grammar of violence that undergirds sort of our relation to blackness? Wilderson would say, as well as a host of other scholars, that there are continual reference points throughout, I guess, the anti-temporality of time that suggests that blackness does operate within an under-register of humanity. Okay. I could give those laundry list of examples. We could be here all day, though.
Yeah. The Wilderson 14 card describes narrative arcs of transformation. Why was the 1AC a narrative arc?
The AF said we should prefer the AF because we can learn some shit about courts and legal system and then change things. We say that there's a narrative arc of freedom in relation to the slave because it assumes that there's a relationality between blackness in the world. I think the question you asked above dealt with why that isn't necessary.
So why does voting assume a relationality between the black and the world?
Because it's not the end of the world.
I'm sorry. So everything is not the end of the world assumes some relationality between black and the world.
No, the idea that public trust, well, sure, but the idea that public trust doctrine specifically has the capacity to, produce relations or maneuvers for blackness to, find value, to exist, to survive.
That's
isn't true.
Okay, that sounds good. I believe it's the same notion.
It doesn't sound good, but sure.
Describes consumption and the 1EC as a strategy of consumption. What did the 1EC consume?
Wait, what was the question?
Consumption describes the very process of debate reinstantiates the methodology of consumption. What about the 1EC did that?
Right, so there's the portion of the Wilderson 14 evidence which is like, hey, debaters do this thing where they talk about all these abstract bodies out here in the world and they use them as currency to be like, look, we can save this black person, we can use their flesh and be like, yo, they're dying over here, there's structural violence, sea levels will rise, their huts in Africa will be flooded, and use that as a circulation, a commodity within this space to validate their own subject formation, i.e. we should win, we have good pedagogy.
So why is winning a validation of a particular subject?
I think I just answered your question.
No, you didn't really. You said it's the validation of subject formation.
I think I just answered your question. The way that you go about presenting or sort of moving through those discussions.
Okay.
Don't tie your subject formation to debate.
Josh has graduated. Tommy's guys. They graduated together in high school, so they should have gone the same year. But Tommy initially thought he was gonna do some teaching, and he got sidetracked by the senior teacher and switched his major. So he was at least 1 year behind him.
It's so mean.
Started to realize that a little bit more, and I think it's a little bit harder with higher player games. Yeah, but at the same time, it's like I still think the right way.
747.
There's never, for example, the colony job. If there are two rows,
Even the time.
right, and you don't have to
Okay, I just sent it out.
just like
hook up with them. Yeah, I need some top granola bars in my house.
Actually,
and stuff like that. So in the first term, I kind of like made a big the leader with the that you have to describe the view have the least stability, and so I had the most stability, but I was tied for second stability.
7:33. I gotta send that doc.
Yeah, because I haven't been in that room in
Okay, so a new doc is being sent out. That's the one you want to have open. And then I'll get the order on top. Let me know when y'all are good. The order's gonna be the case and then the critique. I had the stuff about core failure, warming inevitable on the K. Is that where y'all had it too? Okay, so that's gonna be answered on the K. Case is gonna be some other stuff. Okay, awesome. When you think about voting negative, remember that you are voting against any possibility of engaging the legal order. Raw evidence says that makes warming irreversible because a confluence of tipping points, social death may be violent, but biological death always intershores the possibility for urgency and extinction is a distinct phenomenon that requires prior consideration to ontology for all. 16 mass extinctions qualitatively from developed against its own ethical categories that only considerates left there. This raises the possibility that the ontological position they made it undid claiming that comprehensive negation mass extinction healthy, feeling that this feeling recognized reality, which is a matter of being and non-being and non. One of the life and death world works in the intersection of diverse groups being concepts of life that focus on humans, ignore the destruction that undermines the condition of plurality that enables the life to thrive. Now we agree with some of their fundamental uniqueness like the status quo. Governance has been corrupted by things like industry influence and creative permitting, exemptions, the wave of fragmented lawsuits, the public trust is a holistic orientation away from that that's grounded in African, Islamic, and Native American common law. Our burden is not to prove in this debate that all law is good, but that PTD is good for the environment. The plan reduces the burden on the plan upholds Juliana, which proves very sustaining just to the stability and lowers proof of causation and flips the burden of proof on corporations to prove they are acting in the public trust. It creates a proactive fiduciary duty to reduce emissions to 350 ppm through sequestration and mitigation, and creates damages that take billions of dollars from individuals to enact adaptation strategies. The state is all key to that. They've considered our due and evidence and only can solve the environment that climate change is a wicked problem. That's complexity, biophysical and cultural dimensions, or by root cause explanations, which means the critique can never solve the case. The critique framework, the debate should be about the results of the plan. The plan is the locus of permanent often there infinitely arbitrary negative flammers. Plan focus is key to solve climate change debate because we need to discuss the particular avenues that can curb emissions that Caroline and Claire anti-blackness prize about in the consequence of policy choices. Some men, three, it will not be possible to count about racism without fighting police and more releasing outcomes as well as intentions and intended consequences that are morally undesirable, unfortunate, but that wrong is the persistence of racism shows we need to say in some way to admit the moral significance of our intention perceptions of risky worlds and the consequences of what we have worldly sound building conventional relations of yourself of each other one of our motives and make the world a better place, a world that moves of eyes and people of aggressive racial justice status quo. Warming is the epitome of whiteness. Utilizing agency force emissions cuts is key to curb the socio-material manifestations and fungibility anti-blackness, but will be that 15 fundamental limits for reaching manifestation of white privilege. The reconstruction of impoverished people to proportionate people of the global without the common colonialism, continuation of colonialism, the naval global north, the conversion of human rights, more deeply common the atmosphere, the essence of the criteria of common policy that takes seriously climate prejudice, climate privilege, the race and classical privilege, more responsibilities include challenging privilege, climate death, have 3 forms of payment, deep emissions cuts, payments for adaptation, payment for mitigation of person privilege, can read reality from bargains, however one can must make every effort to acknowledge the limitations, assessing rebels with miscitizens, white and privilege are citizens diversity of good energy, you should challenge that system, barked at, challenge that system, permutation, do the plan and reject the fungibility of black aesthetics, permutation, endorse a network of the plan and move towards the end of the world that accelerates fragmenting powers of anti-hegemonic networks hard to the given political and different strategies to develop real alternatives. See the state of the competition between the two positions, but no one speaks for narcotic arguments whenever they do not perceive propositions to new two notes face each other contradiction always triangulated by unindefinite and indefinite non-relatively by we have the most trouble understanding groups which we ought to contradiction with one another. It's all out full expression of differences with the concepts of the open exchange networks. Displays contradiction operates the challenges the networks imposing their force in the versus full order of the leaders will be swept in the multitude which is capable of transforming all fixed and centralized elements into so many more more nodes into indefinitely expansive networks. The first argument, the plan is not a form of violent inclusion or denial. The Tahiti evidence says that, well, we don't need to necessarily finalize the only legal avenue that is the only avenue we're using as resistance, rather provides one method, one mode of resistance and navigation of spaces, including the space of anti-blackness that doesn't discount the necessity of other methods, which means the law does not need to be necessary. The law does not need to be sufficient to combat anti-blackness, but it is good for climate change and solves our impacts. Now, obviously, the plan also doesn't end all black suffering, but there's a massive difference between things like individual asthma and things like the energy economy that the plan resolves by doing things like taking damages from the corporations that are exposing millions of people to harm. Now, their critique of piecemeal reforms around people to recognize one case in the benefits do matter. For Delgado 13, the rights of rights corporations and enormous importance. Critique of peaceful reforms, imperialistic wrong, minorities and occasional court victims not being promised land. Critique is imperialistic and that entails mental retaliation. Interpretive as a court directing murder housing to disperse funding for heat made. Plus, the revolutionary man, and the meantime, the order he's the family to this meeting more more than to an academic and its massive paternalism to the possibility of revolution outweighs the certainty of the incremental shape of being revolutionary change explosion that all reforms induce complacency but the appetite for a comment the families that tended to manipulate in their heated living room scotch creeds the critique of misses this possibilities and anti-blackness is not a closed system. Disorientation can be transformed through contingency. Pessimism is justice as theological as a base of belief in inevitable progress. Or 15, the one problem we try to look at the beliefs in the rigid systems we try to are trying to get to a model based on laws of generalization. The same as we push the humans into that model of reverse. There ever a human who has one identity become this year's from when we do political work. Question about Wilderson, for instance, I have a category called the anti-black world. This is a definite article and anti-black world. The reason I say that is because the world is different from the anti-black world. Racism is greater world anti-black. Through all of it is a project does not a fait accompli. People don't understand how recent this is. Pessimism is that they've been based on for prior knowledge. The human being doesn't have prior knowledge and slave systems organizing. The rebellion, some of them had a clue about the future. Would look completely out because it wasn't for them. The people have done it before. People have often attempted to struggles we come to the year forgetting the systems of the systems can only exist human actions by maintaining their existence completely go to this way and underlying this fundamental inclusion to raise the question of the system's actions close out because the systems working together the systems are working they wouldn't have to work how an effective system you make people mentally be their own prisoners. We have always said so that we will always have somebody who says don't do that but nobody can do that they don't understand the failure shot conclusions for the new relations real political work should be done but about doing what is necessary understanding it should be done and it's not about you it's only about you it's a narcissism it's about that those that transit you connects the when you take the heretical tradition the world is love that drives are not absolute Johnson 5 the individual level it should be able to treat as it or to turn before the field the real the conflict between each drive despite the beliefs of excessive nature as a return to our attack there's a little bit of gas which is described as dysfunctional subject for able to adapt otherwise the contradiction rising to the conflict internalize the global economy where the precise listen with others with the chance for clash of the existence such friction I'll try to clear the space over the directions of there's something other than continuation of the fall runs of things that can conflict to conflict signals the capacity to autonomous humanity is free insofar as enjoys it is never absolute the deliberation arguments our argument is that traditional our argument is in line with a lot of the basic premises here that traditional democratic systems have failed racism we agree that racism may not necessarily be characteristic of the individual rather it be structural but we still need ontic strategies of resistance to those kinds of structural things like climate capitalism and anti-blackness that debate the debate as a site of consumption argument they can't solve Wilderson and the link is inevitably participated in debate as a site for reason rational dialogue even they try to say the content of their arguments is not form which they say Democrat convince you their reason matter and even if neither of us spill out of this debate site necessarily it's important the way we orient ourselves even if debate becomes a site of consumption the question of whether we challenge that consumption in an ontic or ontological way and whether we choose to orient to warming ontically is important the Taurus link argument, he goes after Taurus thinks that we should that because the PTV is so heavily imbricated with the law and is necessary, it can be used to transform the very nature of the law itself. Taurus 15, the trust union have to be regeneralized, allows to include the changes, not changes, suffer, theological claims, such as the air to be regular for the benefit of all people, indigenous people, ever organized parts of the environment, correction that right can limit by the position for all person, tribal social responsibility, understanding which we that is a council power and a law of responsibility has to be recognized the way this through the PTV raises the legitimacy of the state's actions, the PTV that regards the obligations of the state, the background obligations form the framework for the state commitments to protect people, indigenous people, they are in a specific legal position. Courts are sufficient and they are able to stop allocating damages assessing scientific evidence is something they've experienced with that's what evidence also none of their evidence systems are specific changes to burden causation etc all at the top of the flow narrow construction of the PTU and effective in Pennsylvania created an avenue that effectively blocked fracking that is the what evidence last versus wrong just have a key narrow enforcement rules division 12 and 16 last versus the PTU wrong the PTU wrong Virtue mischaracterized the PTV function the court that has no attempts at policy doesn't really work the state of the bad policy answers support the agency warming is not inevitable the arguments is from a journalist and doesn't assume the unique capacity of the act to cause sequestration which is sufficient to draw down carbon from the atmosphere the wood evidence says we need to both unclog the faucets and drain the sinks it's possible accommodation mitigation adaptations keep Cornelius 16 half a degree of making huge effort there are some CO2 vapor impacts protected to 2 degrees extreme weather events water and cephaloris and half a degree means that short to keep with no house that 4 degrees is also right it's possible to keep temperatures below 1.5 degrees only if there are actions we can take now rapidly phasing out fossil fuels cutting emissions may not be enough. They propose studies such as the global future room CO2 afforestation, reforestation will be important. Now a pragmatic reorientation to changing the world is better than all or nothing analysis of political intelligence can be correct about virtue and finds in the fungibility of blackness, but it's not a reason to reject contingent solution plan. 17 paradigms seemingly practical and heavy political spins after the war. Warriors have reported possibility to opposition ontological realities, not precedence over the task of using such that should damage other effects and not in terms of the properly agree the person of ontological project with the truth of their concrete effects within a wide field of which specific political problems there is always something that accepts the line of reorientation paradigm possibility that is there is always a simultaneous magnitude of the fact of political price conditions for an ongoing search for new tactics mark and an ongoing search for new tactics. The alternative fails, refusing the one doesn't refusing the one doesn't translate to political transportation and where necessary to coordinate political action and shooting the political movement of the universe that should be globally mobilized and supported by the federal extract the ultra level scale objectives the stable for the secret second for policy stable confrontation aggressive actions hot wash sure there's implications they will always be there's oppression and resistance and it's about like people like we compress to a daily confrontation in order to the raw material that will reflect the need to train there's not saying any more about the potential for moving much unless it's actually those who pronounce it everyday resistance to the revolutionist political movement theologically aren't it theological?
Very good. I guess in a world where there is no spillover in terms of material solvency, what is the value of shifting our orientation towards ontic strategies for
Yeah, so two things. Like, we're not stupid. We understand that, like, once the plan is theotic, like, that doesn't mean that literally it happens in the world. But we have two broad defenses. Is one, we should, we've read arguments why plan focus is good and why we, the app, should get that and why it's a good praxis both for education and for, like,
so
procedural reasons, but two, orienting ourselves to
good.
warming in an ontic way is something that the app defends, and that we should have these kinds of contingent solutions to warming in the context of the court. That's still an important orientation that the app produces.
Sure, why is that orientation valuable? You haven't answered the question.
I actually think we did answer the question. The do-it evidence, the Russell evidence both say that contingent solutions to warming key. The do-it evidence
sure,
are
and it's all assuming that those solutions, are materialized. I'm asking in a world where you have also agreed that that does not happen, what is the value of the orientation, i.e. your education?
So the clear evidence says that the simulation, the defensive simulation, is a useful praxis, and it particularly says that in the context of the courts. That's important, and in the context of environment in the courts. And the clear evidence says that that sort of simulatory process provides information and knowledge that cannot be captured by alternative forms of activism and resistance.
Sure,
things like understanding the way that suits are happening right now. For us to know more about the way.
Where I do not go to a court and do that.
Well, we don't discount the possibility that people could emerge from this debate space and actually go and Juliana is happening right now. There are cases in Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Oregon, and Washington. This is a salient issue that we've read evidence in the Wednesday could potentially even check Trump. The Ninth Circuit in Oregon just affirmed this case, which is a pretty big deal.
What is the value of plan focus?
What's that?
What is the value of plan focus?
A value of plan focus. So in the context of climate change, it's important because we need to understand the particular context and implementation details in the way that we can check climate change. We've read evidence in the context of anti-blackness that it's important to understand the policy dimensions. We also can't evaluate whether something...
What is a strategy, I guess?
A strategy? I think it can be a lot of things. In what context are you talking about?
In terms of ontic strategies to resolve global warming.
Yeah, so, strategies can operate at a lot of dimensions, but it's a way to reduce or mitigate or adapt to those impacts. Our question of strategies is one at the material or ontic level and says that we should reduce the emissions of warming and check corporate emissions, like the 90 megacarbon emitters that are happening right now.
In what way does the affirmative create the conditions to solve for asthma, pollution, etc., if it's just a question of orientation and pedagogy?
Well, I think this all begs the question of everything I said earlier in this process, which is that if our praxis is one that is good and we win our plan focus arguments, then that's a sufficient reason to vote affirmative. We don't need to prove that we leave this debate around and immediately the plan happens. That's still a useful praxis and orientation to the world and an understanding, and we argue that we have impact turns to the all.
Alright, let's start about
Almost exclusively tea. Very occasionally coffee. But a lot of black tea.
So like, I know black tea definitely has more caffeine than green tea. But how much is green tea? Just like very little?
Most green teas, are pretty, it's pretty minimal.
Yeah. I just chose the green because it had the ginger. So my voice was doing some weird shit. But I was like, when I chose it, I was like, why aren't you black teas?
Yeah.
But I did just drink Red Bulls.
I brought some of my own. It's funny, they have like all of the classes except I can't go syringe. What guess you usually want?
Yeah, which is the one? Which is the one you're looking for?
There's like chai, Earl Grey, like just any of the like black teas that are super like
Yeah. Oh,
it's
yeah.
weird. They have the decaf chai.
That was one. That's rude.
What? Yeah.
How dare you wear teas? It's real close. Actually not trash. So I'm just like, okay.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I know. Mine's still sitting there. And tongues. I don't know anything to deserve this. It's like cigarettes increase.
Just audible. Or
Alright, 502.
I need one of these cups. I'm just gonna walk around with a bottle. I was judging Nicholas Cigalas and Bowman, and they were talking about like wine and smelly eggs and stuff. And I was just like, well, y'all sound fancy, but I'm just gonna stick with my $5 barefoot Moscato out of the bottle like the classless bitch I am.
I'm buying much more.
I'm gonna run to the bathroom just so I don't do it before the morning.
Don't worry. I mean, I have like, several. See, I have like 70 documents open, so it's not.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Anybody have any Tylenol?
I do.
You don't like Thank you.
What you want to prepare? I came downstairs and I was picturing these two.
What's up? Yeah. I want to weigh that one more. Gosh, there's
It's just pretty short. Lot, great complexity, but kind of like, okay, well, I can finish that 10 hour in 15 minutes.
and each one, I guess I've only played it maybe 3 or 4 times, but each time I played it, it's actually very,
It's pretty different. Yeah, the economies can be more different depending on some of the range of gods.
Yeah.
I think Clement and I are starting to maybe over time.
Okay, so what about like the Hermit plus
Everything will be okay.
Maybe we're not good enough to like, you know, like, I don't know, but it seems.
Yeah.
It seems pretty tough.
I'm just trying to figure out like
Because I think
there's
because one of the issues is like, let's say that player, presumably that player has to have one.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's the secondary price.
Well, I mean, presumably you've at least been able to redistribute some of that. I don't know. That's
That's one of those things that initially
Just for data.
never go.
And doubles
Okay, we
Never
should set
taking action.
That's a lot.
Is that
That's a lot. Yeah, I did like
so
all 3 on day 2 and I was down.
it is, it's like, there's initial, like, 2 entries, but part of it is that the reason, one of the reasons is it seems, I don't know, it's like, it makes you want it, it seems not that, like, you're gonna have to do that at some point. It's an action that has no value, generally, like, unless the board is structured very, turnovers on this one. And it's truly working, it's still taking and just, you know, it's like,
Yeah.
it's not that that strategy is unbeatable, it's just that it's pretty hard to say that given the opportunity, you shouldn't take it.
That's fair.
Because the flexibility is also so high.
Okay.
There's not a lot that other people can do that.
I guess it also depends on the strong gods. For which one you But yeah, it's
So,
Oh god. Jesus Christ. You. Just sneak up on people like that. You give me like a boot or something before you approach me.
I'm just gonna put this one card in that dock, if that's okay.
yeah.
Get my pins.
Is there? Is it just gonna be on here?
Yeah. Just, I mean, yeah, get over stuff.
Overview, you said?
Yeah. Yeah.
Just get it flow straight down.
There we go. Lots of words.
This is a good summary.
I've done
I don't usually, but
Too
for the
many
overview, I
times.
just put something.
I've been burned.
I was so nice.
See that? Yeah.
Blackness constitutes a zone of maximum captivity in the theory existence of freedom with structures all forms indicates they have not answered argument. The middle passage constitutes not merely independent but independent horizon does not have to be the beginning of racism with the repetition patterns of racism of both contingent and structural, i.e. contingent a possibility for the happening of events of things like chattel slavery compromise the extinction of the African as an identity within cultural person's social significance in favor of the ontological invention of blackness as a homogenous signifier imposed on those that endured the middle passage. In other words, blackness is the first position of birth and if you're construed as violence instantiation of being access no form of self-possession as traded within a perverse system of captivity and terror which we think being a blackness lacks a body and is composed of mere flesh and position without the social conditions necessary to abuse himself with meaning. Instead, black people were used as the fueling commodities for the establishment of Western systems of social media and civic governance. What we refer to as civil society, the economic and social necessity of chattel slavery to the global order as we understand it, which means that the central question of this debate is the distinction between sentient capacity and relational capacity. Black people may have been able to speak, communicate, vote, participate in the courts, or conceive themselves as individuals, but they do not possess the three characteristics necessary for relational connection, time, space, transformative capacity, recognition of such capacity, and being subject to contingent rather than gratuitous violence. Now, this means you should filter the entire one through our paradigmatic analysis of the anti-black world's codes and procedures. The entire world is structured through semantic field anti-black solidarity, and the only ethical response is to refute the world. 3 reasons to vote -1. Libidinal economy just have the libidinal juxtaposition of white or black demarcation regulates the capacity to cure violence or sex and evidence as the tactics of white anti-blackness consistently produces a reactive state of war in the metaphysical life which over-determines the resistance blackness is offered. This is the first piece of Wilderson evidence that indicates any reason we win the one he sees a liberal telos of the human and they are a strategy of coherence because that coherence is an attempt to secure the world in its place, which is all of our arguments. The second piece of Wilderson evidence indicates we must create an separation from the freedom of contingency, that we must have a political trajectory towards the world, which is why the one he sees a move towards a political experience. He uses it, the ontological nature of the world to separate itself, which is why the internal link to our third second piece of evidence indicates that this is why fiat sort of overdetermines or overshadows how the structure refolds a grammar of fungibility, because he uses social media in order to renew pathology of bad faith. He uses its generative capacity to court violence, which is why they don't change the way the sort of world works, which is our argument about how the one he sees becomes a freedom of deliberation, which is also a reason for why if we win it, that our quality of life is measured against the backdrop of the radical subjugation of white life. Then the impact is this stifles any criticism of social economic relations and improves the stability of the affluent towards operationalizing the paradigm that keeps population safe from blackness, which is also a reason why even if they agree that sort of PTD is sort of good or that racism is sort of contingent or we need optic responses, they have conceded that the shifting dissent that the paradigm of governmentality sustains a telos of engagement paralleled by things like psychic violence. Wilson 14 says the political economy of the plantation produces technologies that created the paradigm of possibility, equity, justice, vitality are all based on a system that inherently intends to accommodate itself in order to extend access to the slave, which is our argument about how society was never reconstituted with a new political ontology outside. Instead, the boundaries of slavery shifted, proven by the continual antagonism of things like COINTELPRO, racial arrangements like prejudicial complex and racial policing, which is all of the one in our case arguments, but also the first piece of Wilson evidence indicates that the racial policing created the libidinal desire to distance oneself from anti-blackness, which is why all of their arguments about how we need to sort of point. Now, the Gordon evidence says things that we need to sort of point to a moment in time to understand how historicity has sort of shaped violence, has conceded the empiricism, this has the ontological incapacity of the slave overdetermines its recourse for redemption, things like the objective laws of the structure of the social science paradigm. All of this shit premises itself upon empirical enunciated data points which cannot articulate a measure to grant black totality to the realm of violence. There's a super violence that formulates things like aphasia. There's a species divisions between black, slave, and African, which is how social manifestations of value double down on blackness. Now, the public trust doctrine is the embodiment of the law that protects civil society, but only defines itself through anti-blackness and masquerades as a collective protection of the public good, but is rooted in self-preservation. The Afro say everyone has a mutual investment in the protection of the environment, but that flattening out of society is only a protection of the underlying white supremacy. Ask yourself why the people who fucked up the environment get to continue to manage it if they win the war of the Af. Even after poisoning our water and filling our lungs with smoke, they're still the beneficiaries of a civil society that was only meant for them, which also means the public trust doctrine is a social, only remodels the social contract theory that it was always already premised upon, which is our argument about how we are sort of not the owners, but we're also the properties, which is why it's just riding with the hallmarks of modernity. The Af wants to expand that doctrine, but its roots are still, but the roots is still maintenance and sort of protectionism, which is our argument about how they misunderstand that we can never negotiate those terms in the first place. That was the Wilson evidence that indicates that reparations is sort of something that distances itself from the relationality between blackness and the world, which is why repair is impossible. It's also a reason why you should frame the Gordon evidence. It's not a question of understanding rigid systems, but rather understanding the way that those systems sort of repetitiously fold themselves, which is why, yes, every system is incomplete. Our theories, nor there's can explain phenomena of totality, but those epistemological boundaries for rediscovering avenues to anti-blackness is something they have cut us off, which is why, even if your argument is right that there are sort of movements that are sort of successful
successful in the status quo, i.e. their response to things, how legitimacy and sovereignty work in the context of the quote. This is our argument how they sustain the telos of relationality by consistently highlighting themselves between the rights of equality of the world and the antagonistic structure of anti-blackness, which is why their promise of equality is always judged and is the liberal telos of man that automates the individualized subject and their hubristic for sociality, but also always confers citizenship upon the monikers of blackness, which is how they suture or mystify the irreconcilable nature of blackness. Now, there is a voyeurism dissatisfaction to their sovereignty mechanism through our Wilson 14 evidences as debate becomes a site of subject formation due to ontology, which proves the one is a reproduction of the trope of the subject in order to work within the ideological chamber of reappropriation. That's the sextant evidence indicates that you will create that constant pedagogical orientation in here, which is why all of your arguments about how you can be shaped by the dynamics of power, but we need to understand why we can sort of go out there and be fucking goddamn activists in the long run ignores that for the positionality of blacks that relationality is impossible, that the recourse for things redemption does not exist, which is why we must reach towards the end of the world by which this makes sense, which is the reason why we're alternative debate. Our refusal of recognition is not merely an instance of theory unable to negate the power that sustains us. Instead, we utilize the eligibility of Afro-pessimism in order to remain the echo of impossibility in the face of abandonment. This is David Gilbert and Judy Clark who were talking about the said argument to participate and recognize the legitimacy of the court to criminalize political acts when they did appear to make statements condemning white supremacy and imperialism in the United States government lacked the legitimate legal basis to try them because of the government's only illegitimacy of the power to pose the question of the greatest power to short circuit their secret or disparity logic to shift the term of adjudication from moral questions to guilt and innocence to ethical questions of state power and political legitimacy. Journal of Law and Liberation declared that the U.S. should follow the same international protocol with political prisoners in the United States. Fruits of this counter-hegemonic context, the transformation of common sense into good sense can also be glimpsed by taking stock of the plethora of progressives who began by announcing that they would not answer any of the questions put to them by refusing to answer the questions of the grand jury, by refusing to answer all questions prior to them being asked. The witness performed a rejection of the grand jury's right to convene an ethical refusal of the legal system itself as opposed to a moral objection to legal access, which is our argument about how instead of posing the inessential question of how can we restore vitalism to the world, we refuse to affirm the restoration of bodies in need of redress from governance by focusing on what civil society, the plantation of debate, and the resolution are all unable to say about the position of blacks, i.e. in a world that attempts to bar and placate the sociality of the slave. We must convolute the excess of meaning by situating untenable demands as the burial site for United States accountability, which is why we reveal a multitude of paradoxes that hidden before and after the social and political capacity of being in order to refocus the climate of debate on black as energy in order to exhaust the coherence of resistance. Resistance must be politically disobedient against the grain of normative revisionaries, which is something that should circumvent most of their arguments about how anti-blackness is sort of fatalistic at the point where they assume, first of all, their Johnson evidence just assumes that ontology is not, it can't be compromised over or can't account for things like trajectory shifts with all the cross-examination what I've made about how contingent manifestations sort of articulate themselves, which is why even if they win that there are false analogies or that we can't sort of account for those particular violences, that is why sort of Michael Brown sort of can't, the premise of the question of whether or not Michael Brown sort of gets shot 100 times is how a facial sort of it creates an external superviolence, which means yes, blackness is sort of does not create an identity because black is not an identity yet, though this word never just says the world and anti-blackness are sort of different, doesn't have a causality argument, which is not our argument. We don't have to win a root cause argument to why the middle passage created that. Their Delgado evidence just says things like CLS, piecemeal reforms is something that is inherently good arguments that this reauthorize itself in the need form of contingent hierarchy, they say planned inclusion, that they don't need to sort of, they only have to prove that PTD is sort of inherently good. We don't have to win one fucking dissent to the gap about why it's inherently anti-black. Their Burke evidence just says mass extinction that is, and this has conceded that this is an ethical category that we should sort of reject. It also separates being and non-being and life and death arguments that blackness operates itself in an indeterminable death, that social death also sort of outweighs the biological persistence of things like life. They say the earth shouldn't be polluted. Our argument is that the earth shouldn't be polluted by humans. If we win any link, then you should vote for the end of the world. That also they say the state is keeping our arguments that only in the world of the app. That's right. The reason why metaphysical violence outweighs the recourse from the courts. They say also our arguments that the one you see is not a root cause argument, provides approximate reasons why violence circulates. Also answers their Stillman evidence at the point where moral reasoning is a reason why we're rejecting empiricism.
Okay, you good for context?
No.
Okay, can you let me know when you're
Sure. Sure.
You said you're good. Okay, do you mind if I press stop on your timer? Cool. I think everybody's happy with that. Okay, great. So in regards to, I guess, the theory and like the methodology behind ontology, you made an empiricism dissent to the affirmative. Later on the flow, you said you don't need to win your claims about the middle passage. In that context, then, what is the kind of theoretical backing behind how do we know that the world is constituted by that metaphysical violence and ontology?
I.e., why can't you say nigger?
So just that.
I'm asking you a question.
Why am I labeled as Negro? Why am I black? Why are all those things sort of compounded at the side of ontology? Our argument is that even if it's not a question of the violence that's sort of created, or this is the starting point, that there are moments in which blackness is recoded into objectivity that proves that it exists only in a permanence of social death, that every time it is relegated to violence, it is pushed towards the extreme, it is pushed towards the margins, which is our argument about how it's located in an external superviolence.
The follow-up question to that, I guess, is so is all government action shifting or recoding, and like how do we
That's your argument about how we need to hold the United States accountable, and that is how we sort of create legitimacy for the courts, i.e. that the world is shifting, but we can account for that.
So I don't think that the one EC made an argument about court legitimacy, but you cut me off before I asked the question I had in addition to that, which was how can we evaluate whether something is a recoding process or whether it is a improvement? Because your reason for why ontology exists is because
I think this goes back to the subject-object question, right? Like in the world of you, right? You can sort of determine whether or not something is agentental for you, whether or not it creates agency for you, based on whether or not you are able to respond, the adequacy at which you were able to respond. Our argument is that does not exist. Things like when motherfucking Bobby Rush goes to the courts and he does not fucking get listened to, even though all the people are there, proves the deference, i.e. that blacks can be situated in the political, and it doesn't fucking matter.
We've made arguments in the context of the court, particularly in the context of the public trust doctrine.
That's great. We should hold the court as a system in its entirety to a question of whether or not it's good or not.
What about, you've made this like object-subject distinction, like the blackness, body, and being distinction. What about people, so like black people who do engage the court, who do engage like the political systems, do they not get to make that determination about whether they have a
I'm sure they are making that determination. Our argument is that the structure has a persistent thing that folds blackness back into a state of violence, which is why blackness exists in a state of death. There's not a reason for why we're determining that violence.
You said we shouldn't affirm the restoration of blackness. Can we affirm the restoration of the environment?
What? Blackness, our argument is that we should refocus the climate of debate on black ass energy, i.e. the way that we can utilize blackness and sociality away from the world, which is why all your fatalism arguments don't make any sense in a world where we're winning, that we need to recognize life. It's not in the world of the political.
Alright, let's cards.
Sorry, what did you say?
I'm sending out cards.
Okay. Sorry, just didn't hear you.
Should be.
I got something.
Do people get on?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we got everything. So, do you want us to just continue straight down the K?
everyone good? Good to go.
Voyeurism, this at the Woodison 14 evidence is not answered, which becomes an independent ontology debate. They concede that debate operates as a space incorporation for black fleshless for the sake of sustaining white life and civility. We have a voyeurism this that serves not only as a ratio for the possibility of permutation insofar as the very notion of their pedagogy operates within the register of incorporation of the way in which violence matriculates itself as a kind of commodification, but also proves our claims that their orientation is problematic because they operate within the zone of sacrifice, i.e. their call for you to affirm as a mode of resolving choked out lungs of black people in a global flooding of their land only uses their flesh as a bargaining chip for the liberal telos of advocacy, which is a ruse freedom that creates a kind of bare life where we continually buy into the logic that kind of discourse can save us. Now, our Woodison 14 evidence already articulates that discourse never meets the grammar of the slave insofar as it becomes locked within the echo chamber of constant deliberation, i.e. the very contestation of debate, which means that it never is able to break the pathology of discourse in the first place. This is the Martin-Sexton evidence as well that says that the very notion of discourse assumes that there's a capacity for it to rupture the very ways in which this space operates as an echo chamber of that constant state of deliberation, which means your ballot only serves as an affirmation of the way in which their orientation or their pedagogy is played out. If we win a diss-act to the way in which their pedagogy operates within the notion of the plantation, and you vote negative on presumption because they have not resolved the way in which violence is matriculated even under their education model. Now, the nature of climate devastation and black violence is not unique to the nexus of Anthropocene in court and action, but it's produced through white annihilation of blackness in this space as well, i.e. the violence committed in the hallways and in hotel rooms, the perversion of the erotics where white bodies produce coercive relations to black folks in relation to their ability to eat the fact that this panel doesn't have a single black person on it is indicative of the way in which the very grammar of violence is situated and the way in which climate matriculates itself, which calls into question the very pedagogy of court interaction insofar as the very court of this space is indicative of the way in which the court operates, which is the Torres evidence. It doesn't fucking flow affirmative, it flows negative because Torres says that we must fundamentally shake the nature of the court system of the legislative proper, which means that they don't resolve this level of violence. That means level of violence. Now, your ballot only could produce how your ballot produces the conditions for their politics to meet any of that solvency is shaking out of the 2EC means that there isn't a metric of accountability for how that politics matriculates, which means they make it fungible in relation to deliberation. They've made no claim as to how the ballot resolves matriculation of pedagogy, which means your ballot signifies a consumption of a hypothetic creation of agency for communities that you cannot verify, which is precisely the extraction argument that Woodison is making, that it only extracts the value of Black Death, never a question of how the grammar produces the extraction of value of Black Death in the first place, which means that we have an impact turn to their notion of orientation insofar as they have not responded to the contingent level of violence that operates within the space in relation to climate change pedagogy. Now, their model of education is foundationally anti-black and settler colonial rise the human capital model of individual deployment while eviscerating a structural analysis. Their symbolic act only re-entrenches settler state and normalizes anti-blackness as Juarez and Pearson 17, the participation in exchange value system of education steeped in co-articulating projects of white supremacy and capitalist accumulation and close students forcing them to play regain whiteness or build to performative logics and educational landscape based anti-blackness to support the white accumulation of better forms of education fungibility allows social death while these groups exist exchange value in a racial capitalist economy. Tooling is also a normalizing governing tool that teaches people of color to understand themselves as homo. Economic is neoliberal education based on skill acquisition is dehumanizing alienating theory and practice in which to organize education in society enclosure vis-a-vis black communities through work through their participation in settler colonial practices. And I think this is emblematic of the way in which I think is already articulating that there's an impasse between the relation of blackness to the world, which means what the fuck do they do with this education? What the fuck does it mean to go to the courts and rally a case against corporations when there will still be a magnetization of the bullet, there will still be a structure of segregation that makes it possible for the clean power plant to be placed in the hood and dispossess their own placement within a place, which is the reason why their non-situation of that grammar of violence is problematic. Now, the permutation their hard evidence says we can operate within a network where no two nodes contradict. We just have to win that their pedagogical starting point is contradicted to ours, which proves that there can be no network against hegemonic structures, which means they don't get a permutation. I already do that. I already do that work above, but you can extend the Adler evidence as well as the Ritchie evidence on the warming to be proper. They grossly mishandle it. They only say that Adler is a journalist, but that's non sequitur when it's citing data as well, as there's no qualitative answer to the Ritchie evidence, which is specifically discussing the way in which it becomes impossible to resolve warming insofar as the 2 degree tipping point will happen irregardless because of warming within oceans, i.e. the acidification of pH levels, which produces a constant loop of warming and melting of ice caps, means carbon still gets released even if they are able to resolve even if they are able to sequester out the atmosphere proper. It doesn't resolve what Ritchie articulates as the constant warming of the ocean, which accelerates water, which means accelerates sea level rising, which means they collapse the impact. The impact still happens in other climate. Evidence is ridiculous. It talks about the need for contingent relations or the micro-ontological resistance. I think that was the alternative. We posit how we orient ourselves or interject into their move towards an anti-structural analysis that produces a particular grammar of violence. And also, the Cornelius 16 evidence says we can only stop 1.5 degrees Celsius increase. We have a 10-year time frame to do that. I think we've proved that we'll miss that 10-year time frame.
All right, 733. Right now.
Oh, sorry. Did I run your phone? Oh, yeah.
The order, I think I'm just going to go straight down. I'm going to say a little few things at the top, but otherwise just...
You want those on the candy?
Yes. I'm just going to have a couple of lines, but I'm just going to follow the block. What's up? No. We're good with that? That's what's up. I see. Okay. Climate change causes extinction and made answering it destroys the potential for all life on the planet by moving outside the habitable range of temperature and space. Makes life impossible to work out since extinction is an ethical category that has to be resistant to all consequences, destroying the potential for all life, which is a fundamental ontological category that's simply continuous. When we went internally to extinction, it means it has a sort of fundamental ontological category that exceeds any individual internally. You should automatically vote for the future. There's a couple arguments at the top of the things about chattel slavery. Don't relate to our argument. You can still solve climate change even if there's some sort of fundamental legacy of slavery. Ontological are not mutually exclusive. There can be some ontological basic structure that you can still take action to solve climate change, which are external to those things. The arguments about relational capacity, time, etc. The idea of there being no relational capacity for black people is just wrong. Number one is the climate suits. Talks about that. For example, our children's trust have black people in them who have one climate suit in front of judges like Aiken in Oregon. The fact that moving through time and space is so possible because you can understand the value of stopping climate change in the future, and the way that it disproportionately affects different people across different places in the world. Even as a black person, they made the argument that even if there is some possibility of talking to other people, there's still no relational capacity. But what does that mean? What is relational capacity beyond the possibility to have communication and intersubjective discussion, which they have said is possible, even in their understanding of how relationality works? The libidinal economy arguments are wrong. They think that the Johnson evidence says it drives, and the libidinal economy is impossible to understand or predict because drives are fragmented. There are moments where those don't sort of consume the person's psyche, so it's impossible to evaluate the presence or absence of a drive like a libidinal economy. The argument about securing the world in place or liberal humanism, etc. The one is liberal inclusion. The Corona emphasis that cortic action can be opportunistic and contingent in the sense that people can maintain extra legal, extra political, or radical consciousness and attempting to end the world, but seize radical opportunities, which climate change is one. The state can't capture people or fold them into inclusion in the act's context. Forcing emissions limits doesn't mean that black people are accountable to the courts or required to recognize them. Keeping the world in place means we can keep a stable climate. Keep a stable climate does not mean require the sustainment of the social order, which proves that the permutation can still solve a lot of other problems. The PTD bad arguments, the shifting DA, for example. I'm going to do some of the ontology arguments here. They didn't win a basic ontology argument. The plan is still ontologically good. I did above reject their ontology frame for two other arguments. A, the world isn't a closed system, but a set of contingent choices. 500 years of anti-blackness and 200,000 years of history proves it's based on human choices. Their view is more teleological by flattening out all choices. B, neither team has a monopoly on truth. It's literally impossible to make total claims about human history. All of those claims are partial, which is why hopeful slave revotes occurred even in the face of overwhelming domination, which Gordon Evans, the shifting DA, doesn't answer this because violence can shift. It does not mean all shifts are equal, i.e. it can shift and get materially better, which proves there's still some possibility for action within the world. The index of the Gordon Evans about social science is wrong. It's circular because how do you determine whether something is true in socially without some sort of empiricism or social science, which we haven't done? The PTD bad arguments are wrong. The PTD is not self-preservation. It directly challenges the existing order. The pressure emphasis. It destroys the relationship. It destroys the alliance between state and capital, which is fundamentally existing world order, and holds people accountable, forces them to reduce their emissions, which is dramatic increase over the status quo. It also proves it's not private property because it reduces the power of the fossil fuel industry. The fossil fuel industry now drop down the voyeurism. The next few things were answered above. The voyeurism DA, the first part of it in the 2 and 3 will be answered where the 1 in R did it. The alternative. Unintelligibility or objective relationality doesn't translate into action. Daily acts of unintelligibility happen all the time, but no coordinating mechanism for transformation. The alt is more teleological by presuming that they automatically translate into some projection of the broader structure. Finishing brief with the 2C, they presume those conditions necessarily lead to action. They don't. If alt is ubiquitous, in fact, the women are able to defend the politics who dispolitically because the consequence will enjoy its invasive acknowledgement that there's no movement in the way of gunning, the non-problem, that every equal social practices are more effective for the politics. The wilderness code that we hear just says you should refuse the grand jury's questions, then you get convicted. Then what happens? Only the affirmative has a way to deal with those things. The framework arguments were really extended in the 2 institution for affirmative plans. So the idea is necessary for affirmative offense. We have to be able to weigh the affirmative against their critique necessary for contestation in this kind of space, which is necessary for all of our office. I'll explain in a second. Now the 1 in our voyeurism DA, the alternative is way worse because it forces people to only think of themselves or not think outside themselves. The modal B, the emphasis offense against this, and says that climate change is whiteness, and people have to understand their historical responsibility, and that climate change is really voting for does not consume black lives, rather simply understand their historical responsibility
study of the absence of voyeurism. It allows us to systemically critique suffering, craft routines, increase unduly homicides, increase trauma, and trauma, having a sexual word out for risking conditions, identify situation, actions, and social systemic trauma leads to a catalyst for analysis, and we can think drug and helps us understand here, just to clear over the answers, their echo chamber arguments that debate me space for cultivating understandings of complex the structures and the concepts of climate change allows us to move through the world more effectively. Even if we never go to the core, we can understand the sort of way the world works around it. Also answer their presumption because there is some value to what affirmative debate doesn't accident plantation. Neither side has the potential to resist the other, simply attempting to convince you that our argument is true. So is it possible for that to be true? The Tories' evidence is wrong. The Tracy Torres evidence that the PTD can shake the foundation of the existing state legitimacy. Also proved by our Brecht reference, which says challenges the alliance between state and capital, which is a fundamental condition for the world to exist as it is. The education anti-black card is more sense about curriculum forcing neoliberal skills, not our argument. We think we should navigate the world more ethically, which is the clear evidence doesn't require any imposition of a curriculum that was about permutation, do the plan, and endorse the network of the plan's environmental policy and reject the fundamentality of black suffering. The case is a net benefit. The hard evidence is misread. Networked approaches holding advocacies in productive tension rather than coalitions. They can be contradictory. Two nodes in network can be contradictory and work and parallel tracks which contest the state over the long term. What? Yeah, I know. Warming is not inevitable. Sequesters carbon from the atmosphere, which should draw down reduce emissions 8% per year and draw down enough carbon from the atmosphere to get 1.5 degrees Celsius. Their sea level rise chart is just about sea level rise. Since there's some feedback will cause sea level rise, so the raise to some degree doesn't access or extinction about the compounding crisis that occurred in a 2-degree world. The plant still self-sufficiently there. Ocean's chart also assumes there's ocean thermal release to the atmosphere, which means carbon dioxide goes from the ocean to the atmosphere. The plant draws that carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, which stops that feedback and reverses it from being inevitable. We're not going to pass the tipping point. The planet gets to 350 ppm, which is about 1 degree above pre-industrial, so it's not 2 degrees Celsius.
How much do y'all have?
446.
446.
Email my class to remind them we don't have class today.
I
So I was trying to flow like that for a while.
Yeah.
But I spent a lot of time trying to decipher what the words were supposed to be.
That's pretty much.
We have to know what the other part is, but huge and so on. They targeted back up assassinations and assassins.
You should think they're playing through the existence of structural anti-blackness. Their plan is vague and they only grant standing to a neoliberal court and go for government systems. There's no chance that the engine of white supremacy will bounce radical demands without decades of long court battle. In the meantime, any action they do take will surely uphold neoliberal exploitation, dispossession of the globe, any risk. We win that the legal process of one sees cloaked in, retains, resutures, or refolds itself back within civil society. Then it means you or there are reliance on trust increase in order to force nations into emissions reduction because another anti-black desire to drive to generate violence at the level of the psyche in a world where forcing responses to civilizational threats have always been on a trajectory path towards the death of blacks. Kennedy to the panel decided what could be my last debate ever. I don't get to look out like the people deciding my vacancy. One single person that looks like me, the affirmative constantly forces black people to submit their appeals to compromise. So whiteness is the same experience that people submitting claims to environmental racism and loss to the public trust. Those courtrooms are not for us. You should consider what it means in an overwhelming proportion of judges in federal courts are white, but not even close to the percentage of the judges on the strike card for this round. Every time they claim that their affirmative will work for black people, you should remember that they refuse to submit their claim to a black person. To evaluate this claim should be framed in an argument about how white should have to be held to their argument about how white should be held to the historical responsibility of how the world works, which means any risk we win the ballot is decided consumption. You should vote negative because they are the representation of the plantation so far as they're cultivating and moving throughout the world, debating to understand how the world works is how to overdetermine the structure and use social meaning in order to recreate pathology, bad faith, which answers their argument about how there is an ethical orientation to sort of navigate the world. They say life in the biological sense is the reason for the affirmative articulation warm me of a couple warrants here extent. The social life debate arguments that their deference to biological life assumes that body life matters in a world where black people are always killed both physically and metaphysically. They do not, because the life is constantly snatched away from them. That moment is supposedly granted, which means solving for biological death does not mean we will solve for the grammars of social death that orders bodies in the first place. Does not mean us being alive another day. It means that they create the conditions for us to confront that grammar. It simply means that they will end warming. Black people will have to confront their imminent death irregardless, while white people survive in its fullest meaning. Don't let them create tension between who and who is not human. Arguments that in the status quo blacks is disproportionately affected by the disparate effects of climate change, which is why their model of debate forecloses the alternative indefinitely proves that life in their framework recreates the dermatistic approach they seek to move away from. It isn't just that black people experience climate change in particular ways, is that the way they experience the impacts of warming are not unique to warming, but are more grammared by a violent negation of black life, which is why living longer can never resolve the impact debate. In a world where we win that their framework of weighing the F replicates a linear solution-based model of engagement that forecloses itself upon blacks, even in the context of the institution. They have no reason why an alternative could happen post the affirmative outside the condition of hope in the future, but we are impact turning the idea that black people have the possibility to secure their lives in the future without coming to grips with the fact that black people were never meant to be a part of their fucking future anyway, which is why we must be able to dismiss the world of rationality if we are winning that their constant move towards and then away from that telos of the law is a representation or a generalization. It's never our argument. We have our argument. They grow in evidence. Their evidence is that we are a rigid model that ignores rationality, relies on generalization of rights. Our argument is that yes, the system is incomplete to a degree. Yes, no theory can explain a particular violence in its entirety, but rather we situate the world of ontology in terms of desire. The Gordon evidence only says that once we assume the drive of desire is incomplete, then we should be open to not accounting for contradictory impulses within the context of subject formation. Wilderson A isn't for it. B expands on the concept of desire in the context of excessive violence, which yes operates within the model of unpredictability. The F4 is the extradigital murder of blacks at the immeasurable rate of gratuities have risen to prefer our concept of how violence matriculates itself within not only discourse but metaphysically, which outweighs their argument about how they can also be the alternative or access us. We are winning that if they do prioritize the athlete blocks us in a world where we constantly strive for disproportionate freedom instead of recognizing the potentiality that exists outside the boundaries of the political. This is the masochism. This had also proves one relationality between the master and slave is inevitable only in the world of the Athenian system. to engage in the law. They want to forward policy discussions in favor of a model U.S. without ever remedying the ultimate freedoms for blacks to end the world, without realizing the liberal economy or even the structure of the plantation now is still foundational view of slavery. It's not just a question about history, rather taxonomically speaking, paradigmatic violence is the new racial language, which means our constitution was still written by fucking slave owners. They still talk pretty language about equality, justice, and freedom. The system is still based on a compromise intended to accommodate itself, extend the empiricism. This which answers most other arguments about how the coordinating the drive of desire is wrong, because we made an argument about how blacks always get pushed to the margins when they experience violence, which is not a totalizing argument about the world of ethics. It just says that ethics represents a literary understanding of life and death, and that it is a way that we have to imagine a new end of the world, which is one where we recognize that the political measure of the world is sort of inadequate to explain the totality of violence done to blacks. Then we must leave the world in which coherence makes sense, which is the bare life impact that was not fucking answered in the 1AR, which would be the tiebreaker in a world where desire. They are also a deterministic opportunity choice for people, which is how that pathology becomes a regulation method to create inclusion. Is the reason why their ontic shit doesn't do anything for blacks to extend the voyeurism. This also proves the argument that the one is just another narrative that says slavery is getting better because they use desire in this place to constantly touch or repeating itself, which is how whiteness is allowed to simultaneously situate itself in order to reinvent and reproduce the black body. Now, all alternative offers a position that understands the fatalistic nature of political abjection, but moves towards accounting for the social antagonistic field of power relations that don't move past the excess violence implicated within anti-black political ontology. That's the Wilderson 11 evidence that indicates that the way the court sort of legitimized itself is something that we should win this debate now. Now, the Torres Clause articulates the need that there should shift sovereignty from states in the instance of public trust structure to the people in need. They do not do that. They only make it seem more streamlined for things like access. They have no impact. So obviously the 1AR is not lining up with the 1NR's argument about oceanic warming. Ritchie and Adler evidence not only articulates that pushing past for 000 p.m., whatever the fuck that is, past the tipping point, but also articulates that carbon sinks in ocean, creating a loop of ice melting in ocean warming that rises sea levels and triggers ecological degradation, flooding, and which accesses their extinction level. They don't have a response to the fact that warming happens irregardless of their sequestration of carbon from the atmosphere, because they don't pull it from the fucking ocean, which means it's a constant loop of warming they cannot resolve. There's no answer to that evidence, which gives us a 10-year time frame to solve. They can't solve that argument. That at the end of the day, they've conceded that the alternative is a viable reason to hold the act accountable for the United States' reasons for why it's inherently bad, which means any reason why there's an ethical justification to situate themselves towards the world is a reason none of the permutation makes any sense. You should just vote negative to refuse the act. Fuck that presumption shit. 311.
311.
Yep.
I've been like sleeping in the day.
He's very comfortable. I can move on. I grabbed my baby back. really have to go to the bathroom. So
Nobody else is here, so.
yeah. I just meant like I hate going before my speech, but.
Lanning would fight you if he was here, but.
Well, thank God that it's not. Half of the world away.
So glad they said I'm not getting lost.
I'm
Hear that? Don't do this to us once.
sorry.
I
I unfortunately said I was willing to judge everything except course.
That was not smart.
I said that last week. I totally judged Octos, so that's what you think.
We're not ever supposed to be in any group. You are always staying looking good. Sorry, clean room. The neighbor cleaned them looking good. It's very nice, but it is what we have. And from what I can tell, it seems like this staff is much better than it has been here.
They told me that he was moving to drive 30 miles so they would still go.
Sorry.
Just so that they would go during extra turn.
Okay, sorry about that. The order's going to be the critique. So you grab your computer, Chris, and do the work. Okay, one thing to note about the order is, so in terms of the critique, I'm going to start at the top, but then I'm going to go all the way to the bottom to like the case arguments where they're like warming, inevitable, Torres, and then I'm going to go back up to the top straight down. So I just want to handle all the stuff about the case first. And then
Sorry, starting at the top, then the case, then
yeah,
back.
like more like a broad like overview stuff at the top, and then the case stuff at the bottom, and then back. There's zero risk that the alternative can solve the case because they haven't made that argument or explained why. The alternative can solve all existing vestiges of warming, or why it can scale down emissions to the necessary degree, which means that all we need to do is win that some doubt about the question of ontology to win that warming's existential risk magnifies all the sort of gradients and textures of anti-black violence and suffering, but also causes complete existential risk and violence on earth. It structures your decision count as extinction matters before ontology because it ends the possibility for being and it ruptures all ontological categories that it does that if there are gradients of suffering even a little bit, even within the context of ontological anti-blackness and differences in experience warming makes all of those far worse. Droughts, sea level rises, and heat waves all create those experiences on an everyday basis that make the nature of anti-black violence far worse. They do things like expand the nature of suffering. That means that there are different degrees that the critique can solve. Their argument that the way blacks experience warming may be different because of anti-blackness is our argument. Even if that is true, the Molovite evidence says that the climate colonialism, paying back the climate debt through the scaling down of emissions is sufficient to start that conversation and question the legitimacy of both white privilege and state violence. However, the alternative cannot solve the totality of what's necessary to solve emissions, which means that the plan accesses their arguments about anti-black violence, but the alternative does not. Now, the bottom of the flow about warming inevitability, the first argument I'm going to answer is the tourist argument. Tourist definitively goes affirmative because the tourist says that when the PTD has been imbricated with the question of the legitimacy of the state, but when it includes both indigenous and non-indigenous populations as co-trustees and challenges and ruptures, that is what the public trust doctrine does. And that is the conclusion of the tourist article, that the 2A C-RAD and that the 1A are extended. That means that it's sufficient to rupture the law and also materially improve the practice of climate change. The warming inevitable part argument is not inevitable. First, we have only evidence about the combination of sequestration and emissions reduction. The Wooden Bracker evidence says the plant can sequester 100 gigatons of carbon from the atmosphere, along with emissions reductions, which gets back to 350 ppm and solve climate change to 1.5 degrees, not 2 degrees. Their evidence is only about ocean feedbacks. It says that glaciers are going to melt no matter what. However, that plays in the context of emissions releases, which they've conceded from the 1A. Those emissions releases are something that sequestration can solve sufficiently, and we have the evidence about 1.5 being necessary to solve extinction, the plant's combination being necessary to solve 1.5, which would be sufficient for your calculus in this panel. Now, the top of the flow again. First is that the debate plan has been an official practice to adapt for debate. Their big push on things like spillover and plan focus should be rejected because the plan's focus is necessary to evaluate whether we should evaluate things in an ontological framework in the first place. If we can prove that the plan is distinct from that, all the things they've conceded about how we upgrade the olden constitution that was produced by slave owners, how we change due process to include things like environmental rights and switch the burden of proof, all that is a radical way we shift away from the system that they haven't contested much, so I shouldn't have to reinvent the wheel here. However, the debate space is good. They've conceded, one, that plan focus is necessary for fairness and important for weighing the affirmative, which is a procedural question that outweighs any of the content of this debate because it's necessary to situate the debate. Two is that the clear evidence of legal simulation is important to gain knowledge that's outside of the space that other individual activism can accomplish, which means we orient ourselves. The fundamental question is, even if we don't simulate even if the plan doesn't happen necessarily, we move outside of this debate with the orientation and understanding that we can both ontologically combat climate change, but also do things like ontologically contest the structures of the anti-blackness. Next argument of the debate is a set of consumption arguments. The abstract borders and prescribed suffering social problems like climate change can allow us to identify those problems and create opportunities for systemic critique. For example, things like climate change can help us understand shared precariousness instead of just consuming black flesh, and it can motivate a more radical critique of that problem. Their description of debate is overly homogenized because it assumes that all descriptions of suffering are borders, and that's not true. Engaging in nuanced critique of the responsibility of white people can avoid the consumption of black flesh. That's the Krauss evidence. The panel DA argument was the panel DA argument. Chris answered the basic premise of this argument because it's tied to the argument that judges in general, the white judge in general, cannot understand the claims of black people. Empirically, that's been disproven by the people of our children's trust. Either way, you should reject this. The alternative cannot solve the panel, and we should be accountable for this. What do they do to spill outside of this debate round two? Even if they problematize it with it, they don't change the broader fundamental context of debate, and we should orient ourselves to institutions outside of debate as well, which is something that the permutation solves because only the government can reduce emissions. That's the do evidence. The ontology debate, the perm. So first of all is that they can win ontology means still when the plan is ontologically a good idea. The question of this debate is does not the way to represent the ontological steps of blackness, but rather there's the one who can create a useful solution to the political problem. Global warming, that's climate, says black social life can exist within the coordinates of black political life, and social labor could shape possibility for the alternative. Extinction and warming forecloses that black exploration. Now, second, as per 2 and C crossings, their biggest defense of the ontology is the object-subject distinction. Our Gordon evidence is on-point responsive and says there's no one human subject which exerts agency as paternalism for them to say that people engaged in defense political systems are acting as subjects in the world and are at least navigating the spaces of anti-blackness, which means there are fundamentally black people who agree with that the plan is a good idea. It's not that we didn't consult them or anything. Their distinction being distinction so fundamentally as in the middle passage, because that's where they identify that disavowal of black being occurring. We've contested that. The Gordon evidence says that over that multiplicity of years following the black passage, people had different experiences and natures with how they adapted their individual lives and how they reacted to the middle passage. Now, even if their system, their answer to Gordon is that the system's not complete, we agree, which is why the presumption should flip flip affirmative that the system's not totality is encapsulated by that disavowal of social life. The drives argument, the re-evidence by better, it's not falsifiable, and people have naturally conflicting drives, even if Wilderson is not Freud. He's certainly drawing upon Freud's understanding of a libidinal investment that bare life decide. The permutation is able to self-evidently understand that we can reject the fungibility of black suffering and don't have an investment in the law, but rather use it as one strategy to combat climate change. Jaime says that that's a vision doesn't reinscribe the legitimacy of the law, and we can understand that the world is not getting better, but rather that struggle is a constant progress, and struggle are a constant thing that needs to occur, and that even if things like recoding occur, that proof that there is existence of moments of life and suffering, life and enjoyment, prove that there are possibilities for existence in the world. We need to know how to navigate those spaces.
Can I get a new doc with any relevant marks and everything?
Can you just forward
We
that
did.
one?
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't. I think I just signed on to guest.
I think it's just NDT. Yeah.
Does everyone have the documents? Everyone's good.
Yeah.
Jeff, you still want the marked copies, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll just send out another one for Mark. You want Chris one?
Well, the one area structure, I have a TC handle because I have cracks and
I'm just going to make a note on read that.
Yeah.
What's our decision? Good. Good to know.
Positive.
Well, I'm not going to pull a hair right there.
Don't remember seeing any.
Okay. Yeah, so now just we have like and then just working consulting for a while. Cool. I'm actually. Oh, okay, yeah. Yeah, sorry, Yep. Yep.
Can I see it somewhere? I'm having sync issues. That's yeah. Hey, that's me. Kansas where the data centers at.
No.
Yeah.
Wait, did they leave? What was the plan?
So it did two things. It applied Section 111 to data centers, and it ended some exemption for NSA data centers. Yeah.
Do they like emissions, restricting emissions on data centers key to make data centers sustainable? Like,
Yeah.
data centers Did you read Chris? What currently want to see in changing?
I wrote all. I got done with a minute and a half.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, that's fair. They're done. That's the 2 hour.
Which pieces of evidence should I be looking at? Sort of the like warming interval, yes, no debate.
So the 1AC piece of what evidence? I think there's multiple, but it's
The first one.
It's the first one that's like major emissions cuts. No.
Yeah, it's a very first
Warming's real and anthropogenic, so that would 16 card. Then the 2AC piece of evidence, I think it was Cornelius, right? Yeah.
The Cornelius and then the first piece of evidence.
Yeah, the wood evidence is the one that references like unclogging the faucets
Okay.
and draining.
Heart, blue or yellow?
Sorry?
Heart, blue or yellow?
Yellow.
Oh yeah, sorry, that heart is yellow.
closer. If they don't come, shoot me a text on the road. Or shoot them a text. Okay. Should I follow you? We're just going to go talk to the
consequences to it. There's a source of cause. And then we move on to just close.
Something over there, which was all in this. You seem like that. Jesus Christ. So I don't know if I'm judging or yeah, they're like Jesus. And like he was like freezing and by the time he got out and like forever. Which one was going? Yeah. I think like 2 or 3 yeah. Right. Is it possible for you to like so you're using that thing when you're targeting I know it adds but it might be that less space for you so you could literally just drive your back into the right cars and then send you a check. It's like spend an hour, get a faster check. Or you know, also you can actually you're like no. Doesn't matter. Can we do that at a time? So I'm not yeah, that's what yeah, right. I know. Which is how we always do that. You do the extra grab. And like the do not take responsibility. Yeah. Northwestern requires which is dumb because then they just skip. Yeah. Type 100? Yeah. Yeah. So we got look, I am in control of NDT. Beyond that, I will direct you to Dr. Bismarck.
How about this? How about I shut up? This is from my certificate.
Yeah, I will direct you to Dr. Bismarck.
Dr. Bismarck, I'm going to shut up. Yeah.
Almost at a year. That's it.
Well, I mean, how did this? Because I got that money immediately. Could have invested it. You know what I'm talking about. You know? Just wasted a year of gains.
Yeah.
Did you see what happened today? Like healthcare, I'm like, woo, and it was kind of like, woo.
And what was it
decision if we can gather folks.
Want to get your partner? Huh? Want to get your partner? Shit.
Just look at me, you know, I was like, huh?
Do we have all the relevant parties? All right, congratulations to both teams for making it to the octa finals. The decision is a 4-1 for the negative from you. This was a great debate. It was very close. I was closest to voting negative on the panel DA. I thought that the 2NR had some technical and evidentiary errors on that question. First of all, I thought that you didn't have a good enough on-point answer to the CRAPS evidence that they read as the answer to the voyeurism DA, that the invocation of trauma doesn't necessarily just lead to voyeuristic circulation. And part of the problem with the development of this panel DA is that I feel that it was late breaking and late developing. The way the 2NR impacts this is one, as the analogy to the courts that the app asks people to go to, which the 1AR and 2AR have both explained is empirically disproven by some of their examples of court cases in which people have been successful. And two, the ballot as a site of consumption, which I think ties back into the original voyeurism DA, which I think that they're ahead on the line by line, the evidentiary question. The other kind of element to this is the 2NR just kind of saying, this is evidence of them being unwilling to submit their argument to a black person, but it's ultimately tied to the terminal impact of the voyeurism DA. I think if this was an independent argument about kind of the nature of who was struck, their active action in that, and that was a reason to reject, that was prior to and above these kind of other considerations, then that's something that I might be close to voting negative on. But as it is, I view it as another internal link into the voyeurism DA, which I think they're ahead on with the CRAPS evidence. Big picture-wise, I think the 2NR doesn't reprise enough of the work on framework from the block to insulate you entirely from evaluation of the case. I think that y'all are far behind on the warming inevitable debate. I think that the AF's evidence on this is better and kind of assumes a lot of your questions. You're correct that it says that there is a 10-year time frame, but I think that their evidence is quite good on PTD can get us to 350 ppm, and that is sufficient to avoid the positive feedbacks isolated within your evidence. And even if not, we don't have an answer to the sequestration warrant that can resolve that. I think that the AF is also ahead on the extinction outweighs Burke argument, and that is important because they have impacted that as kind of a prior question to, you know, ontological existence of anybody. And finally, I think that there's also some kind of technical errors on things like the Johnston argument, the libidinal economy, non-falsifiable, et cetera, which kind of complicate some of the kind of rest of the benefits to voting negative. I think that the AF wins their AF. I think that that outweighs the biggest neg DA in forms of voyeurism. I don't think that the alt can resolve extinction, which is the biggest impact.
Okay. I agree with a lot, and then just there's a little twist. I think that they do win a portion of the panel argument. I agree, you're ahead on the case, you're ahead on the climate stuff. Okay, so the reason that I think that the panel argument resolves differently for me is well, it was late breaking. There was not an answer in the 1 hour to this argument. So that's a big problem. I do think that in a lot of ways my evaluation of this argument hinges on that kind of technical question more than most anything else. The stuff that you're doing to get back, so okay, I think that the panel argument becomes a way to say, this is a microcosm then of the way in which debate reflects the larger way in which anti-blackness is ontological that is discussed by the negative, and that as a result, I should evaluate what's going on in here differently than what you say. The consumption arguments, but really, actually, I thought the impact argument in terms of bare life was more about that there can be no way in which it's like this is premised on the idea that there can be no way in which blackness can appear politically or civilly in a meaningful fashion, and thus that the consumption argument is really more, it's like it becomes less about the way in which the affirmative is explained the impact argument, and more about the way in which the structure of judgment itself occurs. So the arguments about echo chamber, that as a result there is a willingness to treat black flesh, well, not even willingness, just there's a fact that black flesh is treated as fungible in a context in which this is an echo chamber, and that some of the 2AR responses here feel like they demonstrate parts of the negative arguments. So like, we can't be held accountable for this. This is, it's like, we're really not that responsible for this. It felt like so much of the arguments that you had in other places in the relationship between the case and some of these arguments is the opposite. It's like, we're taking accountability. This is a way to address, climate colonialism. This is, because climate change is symptomatic of white privilege, then public trust doctrine becomes a way to begin to repair that relationship. And so why don't I end up applying some of those arguments to the way in which this is explained, such that, it's like, why inside out instead of outside in, if I believe that some of the that you're winning some of the case arguments. So the reason that that's true is I come back to I think it's even sort of generous to apply some of the craps argument to the way in which the panel claim is explained, but I went with it for a little bit, and it's like, okay, this is a way to emphasize co-precarity. Then I have to return to the question of what is the ontological issues that have been raised by the negative in relationship to blackness. This is not a place where I think that this is the place where I think that, aside from the panel argument, that you all are in the weakest position, because the explanation of the Gordon evidence, which is that it's very good, and really seems like the one card that you've read that truly addresses this issue. The negative is a head on the spin here. So they say, we agree, it's not entirely closed, not totally deterministic, but there is a repetition that, the like taxonomy argument, there's a repetition such that there can be a change in to use taxonomic terms, there can be a change in the species of the way in which violence occurs. It can't really be a change in kind. And that the co-precarity argument depends upon the idea that there can be changes in kind, that in fact blackness does not occupy a unique position with regards to ontology. And I think that you've lost the argument that there is a unique position with regards to ontology. I think that a better explanation and application of that evidence to this set of questions probably gets the job done. In particular, because I think that it would be a good way to phrase, for me, this evidence is a critique of the notion of immediacy and intimacy, or the application of that Reed evidence as a kind of critique of the application of the quotidian or infrapolitics as a crucial element of just you know, and I think it felt like an area where you were a little bit rushed in the 2AR,
Yeah.
and I think maybe changing the structure of the prep a little bit, given the way that the 2NR pivots so much to this argument. I think that there are kind of some of the tools in the remaining arguments such that they're you can justify their application. Like, I don't think that there are ways in which you can get me to treat this argument not as unique or distinct from the rest of what's going on. I also just think that the explanation of Gordon, the spin that the negative makes, if you were a little bit better at explaining the way in which that spin is not compatible with the rest of the negative evidence, that I think is also you'd be pretty good. Like I just Wilderson and Gordon do fundamentally disagree on this issue. Like it's nice for the negative to say like no, but if they're hedging on that component of that stuff, then all of the rest of the negative position in my mind kind of falls apart. Like it can't be the case that this system is both like it's not closed, but no. I don't know. Maybe.
Do you mind if I clarify that a little bit more, just so I'm on the same page as you? Are you, like, in addition to like the closed open distinction, are you talking about like the empiricism DA that like they made in conjunction with like their explanation of Wilderson, and then using their spin on Gordon to be like it's entrenched through these historical?
Well, so honestly, ideally, I would read one more card or just make the argument. It's like the idea that, it's like Wilderson has made this not into an empirical argument.
Yeah.
But by the way, social death is a historical account of slavery and also a humanist account of slavery that is intended to break apart the distinction between, or the connection between blackness and slavery, or the idea that slavery is an experience that is uniquely black. This is the part where I think just a fundamental flaw of this argument. It is empirical. It uses historical argument to establish the way in which slavery should be understood as a system of social death. It's like, 450-page book on here's a litany of examples that establish why this is the case. So the idea, it's like, I get it. Wilderson is not using this as an empirical fashion, but I think that actually could be a place for you to get some more inroads and just like, okay, so just like your opinion, man. Like I don't know, where does this stuff come from if it's not empirical to some extent? That would have been a different card and a different argument. But I do think that it's like, yes, when you arrive at that question, that is a place where an additional card and additional argument could help a great deal. The Gordon evidence alone, I think, could be enough to get it done without that. But part of the way that you would explain that is that Gordon evidence makes the claim for why I should evaluate the debate essentially as outside in, not inside out, if that makes sense. Like, not debate as microcosm that influences my reading of the case, but the case as a way that influences my reading of debate, which is that this is an overprivileging, use the language of that Gordon evidence. Like, sometimes it's not about you. Like, this isn't the way in which we're extrapolating from 500 years to 200,000. Like, your climate arguments contain, and even we should privilege the question of existence. All of those arguments contain a reason to think much bigger and on a much different time scale. It's like, yep, this debate, this panel, the practices that we have here do reflect an anti-black world, to use the language that Gordon does, but not that the world is anti-black. And so thinking on a larger time scale and attempting to make some transformations with regards to our legal system and its orientation to climate change and an expression of the debt that is owed as a result of the modern constitution of the world, those arguments seem like a good reason that I should not actually look at this primarily in terms of my own position on this panel in this institution as part of our world, but as rather our world that influences this institution and as a result the composition of this panel. And read that way, it seems like there's a very different conclusion about what I should be prioritizing in terms of both the impact evaluation and the way in which I determine whether or not there is solvency. You did make the kind of like it doesn't solve argument. I don't think that's true. The alternative argument that has been explained about black energy really does, to me at least, address this issue of like, no, this is a place where I could intervene in the coherence of the appeal to legal recognition or legal strategy, if that makes sense.
The odds solving the K or the odds solving
this little, you make the argument like the alternative doesn't solve any of this panel stuff anyway. I do actually think that the alternative solvency argument with regards to the panel stuff does make some sense, because they've made some arguments about debate in relationship to blackness that I don't really think have been addressed. And that's part of the reason that this type of concession is important, because that was a place where they specified the application of those arguments. So.
I'm kind of frustrated with how this debate ends up coming down in the 2NR, 2AR. I think the 1AR has, I was pretty sure I was going to be voting affirmative, after the 1AR. I start at the permutation debate, and this is, I think, mishandled by both sides. I think the 2NR gets to the permutation with remarkably little time. And I think a lot of the 2NR is implicitly answering the permutation, so I'm not saying it's completely bad. The problem is, I think the 2AR is making arguments about how the permutation resolves a couple of the arguments they're making in the 2NR, but there's never a moment in the 2AR where you're explicitly sort of extending the permutation solvency. I think the 1AR had some really good arguments on this, on the applicability of the network arguments, and I think if there is an explanation of that, I easily am voting affirmative in this debate. However, given that that solvency argument is not explained, it sort of cuts against how much credence I want to give to you on the permutation. So then I start parsing through the link debate, and I get stuck at Torres for a while. I think I read both pieces of Torres evidence 9-10 times trying to figure out sort of how to resolve this debate. I think that you miss some of the spin that the negative goes for on the Torres evidence. I think I don't think they sort of disagree with your piece of Torres evidence. The problem is, I think your piece of Torres evidence makes the argument that there needs to be sort of a shift in the public trust doctrine, and they're making the argument that you don't sort of make that shift. And I don't think that argument is responded to by the AFT really at all in this debate. And that may or may not be true. I just think you need to make an argument that you do sort of make a shift in how the public trust doctrine is applied.
Yeah.
So, back up a second. I do think the framework debate was kind of mishandled by the 2NR, and so I start with the framing that there needs to be a link to the AFT. However, I do think if they win this Torres argument, that is that sort of plan focus link to the plan. I don't know of a reason why a link to the public trust doctrine being anti-black would not be a link to the plan. Yeah. So they win some risk of a disadvantage to the affirmative, which makes me go back to the 2NR trying to parse out the impact debate, and this is where I really start shifting negative my decision, because I think the 2NR has an argument, because they say I shouldn't frame my ballot between life and death, but whether or not the act forecloses the question of blackness in the institution, which I think the combination of the panel DA argument and the 1NC Wilderson 14 debate is anti-black argument is a really good impact card for sort of their contextualization of the argument, which probably means that I should reject the sort of your extinction outweighs framing. I think this piece of evidence is really good, and if you maybe unpack that a little more, that's another way that I could vote affirmative, because it does implicate some of the ontological questions that the negative is going for. I just think it needs to be unpacked more. It's hard, because I think their argument about the not a question of life and death is kind of a response to this, and so I just sort of default to their framing, which means I should sort of reject the extinction first framing and default to a framing that if the affirmative is anti-black, that I should probably reject it, and the alternative is able to resolve some level of the questions. I don't think your defense to the alternative is
right. Yeah.
Correct. I think they definitely are able to solve this panel argument.
Yeah, I definitely voted on the panel DA. I think that the Krebs articulation doesn't really answer how this argument also kind of analogizes the mechanism the AF affirms, the structure of the court system, the access of representation that black subjects have to that system seems to also kind of be called into question with this argument. I also gave you a little bit of leeway, and I was like, oh, let's look at Northwestern's panels and previous debates, and it's not very nice. To be honest, 14 out of 141 ballots but that wasn't something like, obviously, that was just something I was like looking at to make me think.
I don't want to start a conversation.
Yeah,
right
no
now.
no worries. The other thing beyond maybe something additional to add, I wasn't as like in your camp maybe for the warming debate on both sides. Maybe because I wanted more of the focus of the mitigation explanation, less of the sequestration explanation. Because I think in order to access like sequestration results, there's a certain concession that sea level rise happens, emissions happen post that, and you sequester those emissions from the atmosphere. It's like the distinction that the evidence makes between kind of being able to resolve 2 degrees between 1.5 assumes a certain sacrifice that happens after that, where like your evidence is just like sea level rise is really bad for coastal communities, etc. And like I would like the mitigation solvency to be like that doesn't happen in the first place post AF, but even if it does, then the sequestration debate, if that makes sense.
Can you clarify what you mean by that? Because I mean, this isn't going to be super salient, obviously, for like next year, but I'm just curious. Do you mean like because what we're talking about is just total like ppm in the atmosphere, and like it's functionally a math equation. Mitigation, prevents future emissions. Sequestration removes. That combined dictates how much.
I think that
there's
like,
why do we need more mitigation?
I think that their evidence makes a uniqueness claim about how the rise is happening now, and the mitigation claim assumes like being able to resolve ppm in atmosphere post that. I don't know. I think it was just like this debate needed a little bit more meat for me than what's happening, maybe because there was a lot of that kind of mathematical equations happening, assuming I kind of get how that works.
Yeah, totally.
So I don't know. Their evidence just seems a lot more kind of makes a lot more comparisons, and I would have liked more of kind of the solvency mechanism portion of that, but not as much of a valid equation for me because I thought that top level.
I think one of the things that you'll need to deal with a little bit better is sort of your response in the discussion of the ontology. First of all, I agree. It needs to be prioritized. The fact is at the bottom really hurts you. But I think that you're extending a lot of cards with not a lot of explanation. I don't really feel like I should have to go through and read and look for the warrants for all of these arguments because you're not really extrapolating them to the best of your ability. I also think that in a world where that happens, I think that they're making a distinction early on in the debate that there's a difference between participation in legal institutions and recognition in those institutions. So people can participate and there can be representatives who are black, but it doesn't mean that their voice is acknowledged or recognized in the same way. The example that they give, so even in a world where we engage in these political processes, it still relies on, which is where the panel stuff comes in, it still relies on appeals to whiteness to even give some weight to black life. They have to care enough about that, which is why the ontology stuff sort of implicates and filters your mechanism's ability to respond to that, because it still does rely on whiteness's acknowledgement, recognition, and all of those things. So I think that the way that it's sort of, you're framing the app is sort of we hold these institutions accountable, we're a way to rupture the law and things like that. I think I need a little bit more for you for why that's true, but I think in addition to that, I feel like the negative is just proving that they hold you accountable better than you hold those institutions accountable. And so I think that that is sort of like the way that it's framed in the Twin Arts, why we should reject the affirmative and the sort of justifications for why we engage in particular institutions. So I think that they're just a little bit ahead on how like they sort of go through the legacy of those institutions and whether or not we should even put trust in them. Have they done these things? And I think if they're winning the ontology claim, then I have some skepticism about the ability for the app to overcome some of those issues. I do think that you are like starting in the right way in regards to sports. So I think the process is a good place where you sort of ask those questions. I think you just do need to like dig in a little bit there. There are also just a few questions I have at the end of the 2AR that I just feel like I can't remedy as per the explanation. So for as an example, at the very end of it, it's like struggle is a constant thing. They need to occur, prove that there are moments of life and enjoyment. Why is that true for Black life? Why is there enjoyment that the app can sort of allow for, engage in whose enjoyment? And I'm just, so I don't feel like I can resolve that. The argument above it about the bare life stuff, you said we can reject the fungibility of black suffering and resolve climate change. I don't know how you engage in the rejecting of fungibility, especially in a world of how it is deployed in this debate. So I think that's another thing. I'm like, okay, I don't think you resolve that. So that's kind of like where I start, is at the bottom. And I feel like you just need to dig in there. Same thing on the drives arguments. Like, people might have conflicting drives. You're drawing from Freud. It's just like tiny defensive claims, and I think that when you're coming up against their level of explanation where they prioritize the debate, I think that's why you have to invest more time to sort of overcome the work that they have put in there to really explain it. I just think that it's just not as well developed. Also the sort of, yeah, I think that that's part of it. And the very top of this debate, which is a sort of like there are black people who agree that the plan is a good idea, that engagement is a good idea. I think it's responded to the previous thing that I mentioned about how that is participation, not recognition, so that's not something that can really resolve those sorts of things. It also relies on this sort of question of whether or not there is a grammar of suffering for people to even understand the reason these things happen, and understand why gratuitous violence happens, or why people would even have the desire, care about those things to begin with. I think that the sort of legal simulation stuff, I think that was like an okay spot for you, but I think even if you went at simulating legal measures is good, you have to win what you're simulating within that simulation is also good, which I think that they have a dissent too. I think that the way that you engage in that is sort of presumes that the courts are sufficient. And I know you do have some press, you're just like, no, we do express doubt, and I think that you could dig in a little bit more there, but like I said, that then defaults to I think that they hold you better accountable than you will hold those based on the sort of historical nature. Those are sort of my top level things.
Okay.
I actually have one more thing.
Yeah.
I think that you do yourself a disservice by cutting. What card is this? The Mola Beta,
yeah.
as short as you do.
Yeah.
I think that like maybe either spending more time in the 2AC reading this evidence, or like have Callahan read it in the 1AR would go a long way for you. Because I mean, I'm curious, so check out the rest of this card, and I think the meat of the stuff that you need from this piece of evidence is not in the portion that you're reading, but just in the bottom half of this card. And I would say the same thing for your for Torres. I think I might go the other way for Torres if you like highlight just a little bit more at the bottom of the piece of evidence. I know that's a little ticky-tacky, but I think there's some decent warrants there.
I have one suggestion for each team. I strongly echo what Turner was saying about the language of co-precarity in the Craps evidence, and that's definitely a link argument as to obfuscating the specificity of anti-blackness. I'm just not willing to kind of go to that level of making that inference for y'all. Af, you need to kind of reverse pit of doom them on this Torres evidence a little bit when they read this in the 1NC and you know you've got the goods on this. Force them to explain the strength of their link argument, because this evidence concludes definitively Af, and if you can flip that and explain why that allows you to kind of challenge the legitimacy of the state, which their evidence has very strongly said is a foundational claim, then that's a very strong piece of link offense for you.
Changes the relationship between the public and the state.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I also think, I mean, just as I didn't mention, the panel argument may well be backwards. Like, it appeals to a logic of representation.
Yeah.
Honestly, given the 1NC's theory of how anti-blackness operates, like, I think that it is a legitimate question to ask whether or not it would matter if there were black judges on the stand.
Yeah, I thought
because it's about debate as a civil institution, and that is an appeal to the idea that representation within the operation of the institution would change it.
I think the 1AR was maybe a little bit closer here on just kind of the critique of debate within the Wilderson 14 evidence is so thoroughgoing that it's not something that the alt can ultimately resolve, that it's about kind of the whole notion of rational dialogue and deliberation and all of that.
I have two broad questions just for the panel writ large. So the first one is about the judge panel argument. So how much time should the 1AR spend here, like in future debates, given like in this context in particular? I mean, I totally understand why you all evaluated the way you did. It wasn't like a super. Did you all think it was a super fleshed out argument in the law? It still warrants a response. I'm totally with you all that the 1AR.
I do think it was super late breaking. I think say something on it in the 1AR, and then it gives you the ability to figure out how to deal with it more concretely in the 2AR. I just want something.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's not how NDT works. It's mutuality and acceptance. Like, I don't know.
Okay, but yeah, so you all, okay, that makes sense. And then the other question I had was, there were definitely some parts of the 2AR that needed more coverage, like the ontology debate was at the bottom. Where do you all think that the 2AR could have cut time or saved time? Because I do feel like I got bogged down a little bit, and like I also wasn't happy with the coverage. But even if I inverted it and put ontology stuff at the top, I'd be worried about getting to then other things in that debate. So were there places where you were like, you know, spending too much time, like don't need to talk about this as much?
I guess I would say that both the 1AR and the 2AR would be better served by choosing more.
Okay.
Like, you're sort of trying to go for everything. One other thing you could say on the panel thing, by the way, is like, you know, we're talking about late breaking, etc. You could make an argument for me that it's like, how could we be expected to answer each part of this block given that it does not follow the 2AC order? Like, why does dropping this argument matter?
Yeah,
there isn't a lot of discussion about how it is that I should evaluate the debate, but there's kind of an implicit, like, feel like we're applying a line by line, you know, it's like I'm comfortable doing that because that's what I'm going to do, but in that situation, you can definitely reference the way in which it's like, well, the expectation changes if the block does not reference 2AC arguments really, except occasionally by pieces of evidence.
Okay.
I think to just choose, like, I would probably in this 1AR extend Gordon, climate colonialism, because those two go together, Torres on changes the relationship to the state, and use that as a place to extend a couple of the legal strategy style arguments more by site, and that might be it.
So, like, no perm.
Oh, sorry. One other thing. Probably the existence argument, and that's
okay.
No, I would not extend the perm.
Okay.
What is permeable about this position?
Like
it says end the world.
I guess that's fair. We wanted to like distance climate and like how you should respond to climate from how you wanted to how you should respond to anti-blackness, but like I understand
Okay, so just like a sort of, this is a larger affirmative strategy thing for me, is like, respond to anti-blackness is not, there's no part of the 1AC that is compatible with a response to that if the negative is correct about what that means.
Okay.
And so that's why, like, the reason I mentioned Gordon sort of first there is like, you must defeat what it means.
Okay.
And then it's like, then what, you know, if you defeat what that concept means, or the way in which that concept plays into how you evaluate the rest of the arguments, what concessions, like what portions of the block can the negative extend that are damning for the affirmative? That you've switched the relationship by choosing and explaining a little bit more thoroughly. Like, for one, that Gordon argument is a way to phrase it as like, time does pass.
Yeah, I think you don't have to like extend every argument or every card you write about intelligence. John said, considering the amount of like, explanation that ever goes into it, just like not that helpful. So take out like that's what 15-20 seconds. So you could maybe even one, but like little pieces. Choose your best ontology, or answers to ontology. Really dig in and explaining some examples, etc. And I think that so it's not the number of things, but the level of explanation which is required.
I will say that 2AR also spends maybe somewhere between like 15-25 seconds in various places on the like alt doesn't solve the AF, and I don't think that was like ever a question for me that the alt could or cared about solving the AF.
Okay. Just do it once, and you do there, then you start to do something. For the negative, I would suggest, I think that you sort of, okay.
Sorry, yeah,
You're
gotta
good.
get back to me. I'm ready.
Okay. I think that you should work on consistency of labeling your DSAT arguments, because I feel like I had to sort of go through, I think that the way it was labeled as like a masochism DSAT in the 2NR, and I don't think that's really how it was labeled previously. I think that consistency of those labels is important, because I usually sort of block those things off and compartmentalize them in like labeling as a DSAT, because then when those things aren't consistent, I have to just look for the explanation, and it requires more searching. I think it's just better to be like, this is a DSAT that we've made. And there are some in which you do that, but I think that there was some more renaming or labeling it as a DSAT in the 2NR rather than sort of developing it as such previously, which might be a little bit more helpful. Maybe that's just like elusive, but I think it's just more helpful to sort of like get it out there for this is a piece of offense, et cetera, which is just a small thing, but yeah.
For the negative, I think an argument that you might want to make on this permutation is like the idea of networks probably assumes some level of relationality between blackness and the AF, which I think you are impact turning that very sort of idea that there is relationality.
You mean like in terms of like it needing to continue to exist.
Yeah.
Kind of use the like Gordon evidence. I would just like name drop all of them and explain whatever argument you want them to make for that theory, if that makes sense. And then after like I think the third theory explanation and then use the app as like a case study to explain that theory would be kind of nice, and like a deeper explanation of kind of the direction that the mechanism takes, kind of society, what happens with it, etc. would be pretty cool. And I think that that answers a lot of the questions that Dan's ballot kind of sort of asked to formulate, was how the Torres evidence changes things like burden of proof, etc. like that, and how that kind of restructures all the nuance that their ontology arguments assume.
I have one last thing. I don't want to keep you all too long, so if that's the thing, then fail, obviously. But when in a situation where I'm giving the warning article, so I was extended the block, I think because I was just trying to sort of chase down the block, which clearly was a mistake. Given the weirdness between the block and the 2AC lineup, how should I think about organizing that? Should I just like reference 2ACRs and then just answer whatever is relevant from the block?
Just
don't follow those.
Don't follow those.
Do it thematic. I wouldn't need to just be like, this answers these arguments that they made. Circle the ones that you don't think are answered from 2ACR
Yeah, just re-raise. It's like, what? Am I gonna say, like, oh, you just, fundamentally unjust that you didn't respond to each argument in the block. Like, what? How do you know
that? Right. Which is why the way I always think about it is like, think about what each part of their argument means. Compartmentalize the debate for yourself. So even if it's like you don't get to every argument, you get to every component of their argument, and then you can reassert your order. Like this answers this portion of the debate, and if you label it as such, like I will label it as such as well. And so I'm like, okay, like there's no way you're going to chase down the block in any debate, not just this one. It's just like not a good way to approach it.
But is the 2NR going to look at us with a straight face, like they dropped all these arguments that we made? What?
Oh, who cares?
Well, it's like then you get to point out the way in which, what we're talking about is explicit reference, then there's clearly not a lot of explicit reference to some important 2AC arguments. So, have fun with that.
That only hurts them more.
I don't.
All their link articulations are implicit from kind of the top level arguments they're doing.
Watch this happen a lot recently, and just, yes, the negative benefits from, we don't have a structure anymore.
Yeah. Because they're also going to compartmentalize the debate. Like they're not going to do that either. So it's just like there's just like nothing to it. Yeah. For y'all.
Okay. Thank you all so much for
coming.
Appreciate
it.
Great debate. Congratulations.
Good year.
I never asked before, but there was going to be sad what year.
We're both juniors.
Yeah.
Actually, surprise. Sorry about that one.
He's making it worse. He's coming back.
No, that sounds like don't do that.
You can speak for yourself.
Okay.
And you like the rest.
I love probably I'm go.
I think we're stuck.
Go. Where is it?
I thought I was about to go full tournament without that.
Yeah, I know. It would have been crazy.
We don't have this really necessarily. We're going to now, but I really. Y'all are great. Thank you. When did they go? Like, how behind are we in regards to that?
When I came in here, and that's my that's about it's only like a minute.
Okay, cool. So they're not like we ordered an hour ago, an hour ago.
No. They were waiting for a while because I was trying to get to like review it. I didn't want to decision.
Yeah.
But of course they don't.
Yeah, I know. They never care.
There are several of these matchups that seem like that.
No?
The right move. Done.
Hey, Polly. Nice year.
Okay, sure. Thanks. Sorry.
No.
I appreciate it. Thanks for all the feedback. There's a lot to think about this summer, and hopefully we can work out next year. So.
Yeah, and This is
representation does not solve. When you said that, I was like,
No, I was okay.
No,
I
know.
You're
so back into our turn.
I just because I wrote representation on my flow.
Good.
It's tough to
Also,
like, situate it in the context of debate, but what you said makes sense.
It's where
just talk to this guy. He's talking a lot about this stuff, and we all have, honestly.